Under the golden ceilings of the Vatican, millions gather each year, some to pray, some to admire art, some simply to witness history standing still. But beneath that beauty, beneath the marble floors and the grand columns, there is another Vatican. A Vatican built not for visitors, not for tourists, not even for most of the clergy. A hidden world where the air never warms, where light cannot survive, where silence feels less like absence and more like something alive. And the most unsettling part is not the idea that secrets exist there. The most unsettling part is the idea that some of those secrets may not be hidden because they are false, but because they were never meant to be seen, because they were never meant to be known. Some historians believe human history is shaped by kings and conquerors. Some believe it is shaped by wars and revolutions. But another perspective suggests something far more disturbing, that history can be shaped not only by what is written, but by what is buried. And no institution in history has mastered the art of burial, of knowledge, of records, of questions more than the Vatican. This is not a story about one scandal. This is not a story about one missing document. This is an exploration of what may lie beneath the church itself, behind iron doors, beneath stone corridors, inside vaults, not marked on any official map. And it begins with a man whose name barely exists. A priest known only as Father Angelo. Almost nobody has ever seen his face. There are no photographs of him in public Vatican tours, no interviews, no books written about him. Yet for nearly 3 decades, Father Angelo was entrusted with something few others ever were. He was the quiet custodian of the lowest levels beneath the basilica, a silent guardian of a world that was never meant to be visited. His robes were always gray, dust-colored, like the stone itself had claimed him. His voice was always low, almost hesitant, as if every word he spoke might awaken something sleeping. And Father Angelo once said something that should not be taken lightly. He said, "The church does not bury its dead. It buries its questions." At first, the phrase sounds poetic. But when you understand what Father Angelo had seen, it becomes a warning. Because beneath the Vatican, there are corridors that do not appear on any tourist map, narrow hallways that remain cold even in summer, walls smooth to the touch, as if time itself had polished them, air that feels thick and stagnant, heavy with centuries of confinement. And there is something strange about those corridors. When you walk through them, your footsteps do not echo. The sound simply disappears, as if the stone absorbs it, as if the walls were built not just to hide what is behind them, but to silence the very act of approaching. Father Angelo said there were rooms behind walls that looked solid, rooms concealed so perfectly they could not be detected by ordinary inspection, doors without visible locks, yet impossible to open, scrolls sealed with ancient wax, so old the wax cracked apart with the fragility of bone, and, deeper still, chambers that predated even the first basilica. Not renovations, not expansions, but structures so old they felt like something had been built over them, intentionally, as if the Vatican had been constructed not only as a holy place, but as a cover. Father Angelo spoke of vaults that were absent from official records, vaults that even senior clergy rarely acknowledged, and among them, one chamber stood out above all others, a circular vault, a perfect circle carved into the earth, hidden beneath layers of stone and sacred architecture. Its floor was black stone, not polished marble but dark, almost volcanic rock. Its walls were covered in Latin phrases, but according to Father Angelo, these phrases could not be translated, not because nobody tried, but because the Latin was wrong. The words looked Latin, but behaved like something older, like Latin itself had been twisted into a code. There were no altars inside, no relics on display, no decorations, nothing of material value, nothing except one impossible thing. At the exact center of the chamber, there was a column of air, and it was colder than ice. Not cold like a draft, not cold like underground stone, cold like something unnatural. Even in a sealed room, even without wind, even without any external source of refrigeration, it remained a standing cold, a vertical pillar of freezing air that should not have existed. Father Angelo said priests once visited that chamber. Then they stopped, and no one ever explained why. He said some men who entered would not speak afterward, at least, not about what they felt. And he said the chamber had a presence, not a physical object, but something that made the human body recognize danger, something that made the mind grow quiet, something that made people want to leave quickly and never return. Father Angelo himself never claimed to know what it was. He simply watched. He kept silent. He waited. And then something changed. It was an early winter morning, around 1990. Above ground, the Vatican bells rang, as they always did. The world continued. But below, something happened that Father Angelo never forgot. The silence in the corridors deepened, not like quiet, like emptiness, like sound itself had been removed. Then a vibration passed through the walls. Not a natural tremor, not the rolling shake of an earthquake. Something else. Something that felt intentional, as if the stone had been touched from the inside. Father Angelo said the walls did not crack. The floor did not collapse. But every surface seemed to respond, as if the underground structure had become aware. And, after that moment, the Vatican acted quickly. The corridor leading to the circular vault was sealed, not casually closed, not restricted, sealed with stone. The work was not done by ordinary builders. It was carried out with the urgency of a direct order from the highest authority. And from that day onward, the vault was removed from access, removed from discussion, removed from memory. Then, the next spring, Father Angelo retired, quietly. No farewell ceremony, no public announcement, no record of where he went, and no journal was ever found, nothing written down, no confession, no final explanation. Only one thing remained, a small card discovered beneath a secluded altar. One sentence written in careful handwriting, a sentence that sounds more like a final warning than a thought. It said, "They are not hiding relics. They are hiding something older than belief. Older than belief. Not older than the church. Older than belief itself." That phrase is where the story stops being a rumor and becomes something much darker. Because what could exist beneath the Vatican that is older than belief? And why would the church, an institution built on faith, need to bury something that predates faith itself? There are three possibilities. The first possibility is that the vault contains texts, not ordinary texts, not theological debates, but documents that rewrite the foundation of Christianity, lost gospels, suppressed letters, names erased from history, texts describing a different origin of the faith, perhaps a version that was never meant to survive. If such writings existed, they would not be hidden because they are meaningless. They would be hidden because they are powerful, because they would change what billions believe and why they believe it. The second possibility is older, more disturbing. That beneath the Vatican lies something pre-Christian. A structure, a cult chamber, an archive, or a remnant of a civilization the church chose to build over. Because sometimes the best way to erase a place is to sanctify it, to build a cathedral where a forbidden truth once stood, to cover something ancient with something holy until the world forgets what came first. And the third possibility is the strangest. that what Father Angelo described was not a document, not a relic, not a ruin, but a phenomenon, a presence, something physical yet unexplained, something that does not belong to history, but to reality itself. A cold column of air that should not exist. A chamber with inscriptions that resist translation. A tremor that was not natural. A sealing order issued instantly. A man erased quietly after decades of service. And one final sentence, older than belief. If this story is untrue, it is elaborate. If it is true, then it suggests something terrifying. That the Vatican is not only guarding faith, it is guarding what existed before faith, and perhaps what might outlast it. Because secrets do not remain buried for centuries without reason. They remain buried because they are dangerous. Not dangerous to life, dangerous to reality, dangerous to certainty. The silence beneath the Vatican is not simply silence. It is containment. It is control. It is the quiet weight of something kept from the world for as long as possible. And here is the question that cannot be avoided. If a door exists beneath the Vatican that was sealed not to protect a relic, but to protect the world from what lies behind it, then whose safety is the Church protecting? Ours or theirs? And if you were standing before that iron door and you had the key, would you open it? Or would you leave it buried and accept that some truths were never meant to be seen? Because history is not only shaped by what we learn, it is shaped by what we are forbidden to learn. And if Father Angelo was right, then beneath the Vatican is not a tomb. It is a lock, and whatever is inside has been waiting longer than belief itself.
There are secrets that never sleep. A box, a symbol, and a number 2039. Tonight, let me tell you the story of the final prophecy of the Knights Templar, where the past and the future meet in the dark. If you love stories that send chills down your spine yet you can't stop listening to stay, history is about to tell you what it was never meant to reveal. The artifact was interred where its discovery was least likely. It was not situated within a grand temple or an ornate reliquary, but deeply embedded behind a decaying altar wall, encased in lead and lime and concealed for 7 centuries. When the containment box was finally opened in 2001, its contents did not merely unsettle the attending archaeologists. They engendered a profound sense of apprehension. Inside lay a metallic disc, cool to the touch, engraved with a design incongruous with any known Templar symbol. This symbol delineated a specific date, a date within our current era and a prophecy which ecclesiastical authorities had sought to eradicate, a secret the Knights Templar evidently died to safeguard. It was subsequently termed the Last Sigil. The narrative begins with a reconstruction of the scene, the perceived slow creak of ancient iron doors opening into a chapel that had not admitted natural light for 5 centuries. The air hung thick with dust, evoking the solemnity of incense, and every brick seemed to resonate with untold secrets. Behind the main altar, a stone slab appeared softened by countless forgotten prayers, yet exhibited an unsettling irregularity. The symmetry was flawed. The masonry lines did not precisely align. In 2001, local restoration specialists in Languedoc observed this anachronistic stonework and undertook an unprecedented action. They breached the wall. The subsequent discovery initiated a cascade of quiet repercussions throughout private ecclesiastical archives, discreet academic networks, and ultimately reached a Vatican conservator who chose not to remain silent. A small lead-sealed medieval box, evidently untouched, contained a singular object. It was neither parchment nor a chalice, but a disc, roughly the size of a human palm, fashioned from an alloy that continues to resist definitive analysis. Its surface was etched with markings that no recognized Templar order should have employed. At its center, a 6-armed cross appeared, fractured and distorted. Radiating from this core were sigils of an entirely different nature, astronomical, celestial, and, some posit, prophetic. This artifact, now identified as the Last Sigil, defies simple categorization. It transcends temporal boundaries. Embedded within its symbolic system, encoded in a cipher so abstruse that it had not been referenced for over 600 years, was a specific date. This date pertained not to the past, but to the imminent future. This narrative diverges from conventional Templar mythology. It does not delve into speculative tangents regarding holy grails or lost bloodlines. This account is not concerned with what the Templars might have discovered, but rather with what they endeavored to conceal, and how they may have encoded the conclusion of an era within a metal disc no larger than a small plate. Should this artifact prove authentic, and all indications suggest it is, it would not merely reveal the Templars' beliefs concerning time, prophecy, and celestial mechanics, but also demonstrate their foresight of an impending, terrifying, and seemingly inevitable event. To ensure continued access to insights history has deliberately obscured, consider subscribing. This investigation will span continents, centuries, and cosmological paradigms, examining forgotten manuscripts, long-suppressed Vatican records, cryptographic patterns, and astronomical alignments once known only to a dwindling priesthood. At the heart of this inquiry lies one sigil, one prophecy, and one inescapable query: what transpires when the countdown concludes? The chapel itself remains accessible, a modest edifice nestled in the French countryside near Bézieux, adjacent to the crumbled remnants of a former Templar commandery. Most passers-by would likely overlook it. Its roof has long sagged, moss encroaches upon the stone like slumbering ivy, and its bell tower has been devoid of a bell for 2 centuries. Yet, beneath this fading ruin lies a mystery whose implications extend far beyond its lichen-streaked walls. The restoration team arrived in the spring of 2001, their efforts discreetly and almost anonymously funded by a preservation grant absent from public registries. Their stated objectives were structural reinforcement and archival photography. However, the team brought more than scaffolding and brushes. Among them was Dr. Hervé Langlais, a medieval symbologist from Marseille, recognized for his unconventional theories on Templar communication. He was not officially listed as an archaeologist, nor was his presence recorded in the site's documentation. Nevertheless, by the 3rd day, it was he who ordered a halt to the work. The reason was straightforward. The altar wall was not original, or rather, it appeared suspiciously new, dating to the early 14th century, shortly after the dissolution of the Templar order. Its stones were cleaner, the mortar less degraded, and when gently tapped, the wall produced a resonance far too hollow for a solid barrier. Behind it, a cavity awaited, sealed centuries prior. The process of dismantling this false wall spanned nearly 2 days, largely conducted in silence under torchlight. Beyond it lay a small alcove carved directly into the bedrock. At its center rested the leaden box, hermetically sealed with no discernible hinge or lock. It had been meticulously wrapped in fragments of what appeared to be silk, a luxury in medieval France, and secured by rusted copper brackets. According to Langlais, an absolute silence descended upon the room as they opened it. The sole content was the disc. It was surprisingly heavy, slightly warm to the touch, and composed of an unclassifiable metallic composition. Some suggested tin, others a complex alloy containing antimony or lead. One theory even posited a meteoric origin, though no tests have confirmed this. More significant than its material composition were the engravings adorning its surface, a network radiating with unsettling precision. There was no Latin text, no inscription, only the visual lexicon of power, geometry, and concealed time. At its core, the unmistakable red cross of the Knights Templar, yet with 6 arms instead of 4, one of which was broken, splintered, as if deliberately shattered. Around it, a ring of symbols echoed ancient planetary glyphs, subtly altered, fractionally offset, like a shadowy reflection of the heavens. Langlais captured hundreds of photographs, but these images were never released. The official report submitted to the Ministry of Culture entirely omitted the discovery. Just 3 months later, Langlais resigned his academic position, departed Marseille, and reportedly relocated to a monastic retreat in Corsica. He has not made any public statements since. The available information derives from a brief period in 2002, when a few low-resolution scans of his notes appeared online. Quickly dismissed as elaborate hoaxes, they have since vanished from most digital archives. However, they confirmed one crucial detail: the object was authentic, and it corresponded to no known Templar artifact ever catalogued. The most peculiar characteristic was neither the central cross nor the enigmatic planetary glyphs, but the outer ring, a precise arrangement of nearly microscopic notches, formed what some interpreted as a cipher, specifically a substitution code linked to astronomical ephemeris tables once used to chart celestial bodies. When loosely decoded, this sequence aligned with planetary movements culminating in the year 2039, a date of considerable importance. Historically, Languedoc was no stranger to secrets, having served as a stronghold for Cathars, Templars, and various heretical factions. The town of Rennes-le-Château, mere miles away, has fueled centuries of occult speculation. Yet unlike those myth-enshrouded tales of grails and gold, this disc presented no treasure map, no royal bloodline. Its message was starker, more precise. Not where, but when. The often overlooked detail is that the disc was not merely placed loosely in the box, it was meticulously set into a velvet-lined groove. This groove perfectly matched the disc's curvature, indicating it was designed for transport. It was not concealed to be forgotten, but to be protected and preserved until the appropriate individuals discovered it, or until the opportune moment. This raises a disconcerting question, one still debated quietly among scholars. Was the disc sealed behind that altar to shield it from the church, or to shield it from humanity? For the church, it appears, has never formally acknowledged the object. No official records, no conservator samples, no museum holdings exist. The Vatican has consistently denied any involvement. Nevertheless, within 2 weeks of the discovery, a previously unknown cardinal arrived in Bézieux bearing diplomatic credentials. The site was closed the following morning, and the disc, if reports are accurate, was never catalogued into any recognized institutional archive. This silence speaks volumes, not only about the artifact itself, but about what it may signify. A final communication from an order long extinguished, a silent cry encoded in geometry and interred in stone, waiting and perhaps, more chillingly, waiting for the present moment. One is drawn mentally closer to the object itself. The disc, this enigmatic metallic whisper from the 14th century, seems to exert a gravitational pull, much like a lock anticipating its key. From a distance, it resembles a wheel or an ornate seal. However, upon closer inspection, a deeper pattern of deliberate intention emerges. It is evident that this object was crafted to communicate across epochs. The initial attempt at decoding was not undertaken by a cleric or a cryptographer, but by Klaus Ehrenfeld, a retired German astrophysicist with an avocational interest in medieval studies. He spent nearly 2 years meticulously tracing the symbols along the disk's outer edge, utilizing leaked scans from Langlet's 2002 note. His objective was purely data-driven, devoid of theological interest. To his astonishment, what initially appeared as random etchings began to coalesce into a sequence of intervals. Ehrenfeld correlated these notches with known planetary cycles and discerned a profound anomaly. They did not track past events but projected into the future. Specifically, the glyph sequence aligned most precisely with a syzygy, a rare celestial event where 3 or more planetary bodies achieve a straight configuration. The sequence on the sigil corresponded not to any syzygy, but to one predicted for early August 2039, when Mercury, Mars, and Saturn will form a near-triadic configuration in the vicinity of the constellation Virgo. This alignment, while intriguing, became truly unsettling for Ehrenfeld, ultimately prompting him to sever contact with his collaborators when he superimposed the sigil's markings onto the projected sky map. The inner engravings, distinct from the planetary glyphs, specifically the angular patterns between them, mapped perfectly onto the relative positions of the 3 celestial bodies. The fractured 6th arm of the cross pointed with uncanny precision to the moment of maximum alignment. It appeared as though the disc was created not to represent an idea, but to demarcate a specific moment that had yet to transpire. The disc's outermost ring, so finely detailed it appears purely ornamental, also attracted considerable attention. Under magnification, it revealed a ripple-like texturing, inconsistent with traditional hand engraving. Theories regarding its creation vary. Some propose a rudimentary lathe, while others insist upon an impressed mold, possibly cast. However, the pattern itself deviates from the decorative norms of the period. Instead, it mimics the form of a lysogous curve, an oscillating waveform generated by harmonic motion. The concept of a lysogous curve was not formally described until the 19th century, rendering its presence in a 14th century artifact profoundly perplexing, if authentic. This leads to the most controversial interpretation. that the sigil is not merely symbolic but functional. Some posit it as an astrolabe, a rudimentary device for astronomical calculation. Others, pushing the theory further, suggest it represents an encoded countdown, a temporal trigger whose purpose is to mark a celestial event with significant spiritual or even existential consequences. In this view, it is not a map, but a warning, a clock. Predictably, this is where scholarly debate becomes contentious. The sigil lacks any overt inscription, no Latin, no Hebrew, not even the stylized Gothic script common in late Templar liturgy. It communicates solely through symbols and patterns, making it susceptible to multiple interpretations and potential misapplication. One academic faction argues it is a devotional tool. Another insists it serves as a ritual marker. Yet, a third group suggests it points to something altogether more extraordinary, that the Templars possessed knowledge of celestial rhythms centuries ahead of their era, implying they were not merely crusaders but cosmic archivists. This is a compelling hypothesis, but it rests on a pivotal unanswered question. If the sigil genuinely encodes a future date, how could a group of 14th century warrior monks have calculated a planetary alignment nearly 700 years in advance without telescopes, computers, or access to ephemeris tables that would not exist for centuries? This lies at the core of the debate. Some researchers point to Islamic astronomical influences, noting that the Templars maintained contact with Muslim scholars during the Crusades. Others argue for lost Greek manuscripts transmitted through Byzantine intermediaries. However, even these sources typically lack the precision encoded on the disc. The reference to Langley here is unavoidable. His own unpublished notes, briefly recovered before his withdrawal into silence, hinted at a lost cipher used among high-ranking Templar, initiates a geometric language composed of angles, ratios, and proportional harmonics. Langlaise termed it the initiate syntax. Although the term has never appeared in known Templar documents, it offers a crucial clue. If the sigil operates through such a cipher, it may not utilize language as commonly understood. Instead, it may communicate through temporal intervals. One detail that continues to intrigue researchers is the disk's central axis. A subtle, barely perceptible indentation suggests the sigil was intended to rotate, not freely, but with deliberate manipulation, akin to a combination dial. It is an observation that, once pointed out, becomes impossible to unsee. The concept of a spinning disk aligning with celestial configurations is not entirely unprecedented. Ancient Mesopotamian star maps occasionally incorporated movable parts. However, for the Templars, such a device would necessitate an entirely different historical framework, one where they were not merely importing relics from the East, but forbidden knowledge. One theory posits that the sigil represents a surviving component of a larger apparatus, a modular mechanism, a ritual machine. If this holds true, then what was discovered is not the complete device, but its key. And like any key, its significance resides not solely in its form, but in what it is designed to unlock. Therefore, the present situation involves a disk that projects the future, encoding geometry before geometry had a formal name, and which may, in a profound and unsettling manner, have been counting down to a moment not of discovery, but of convergence, a convergence rapidly approaching. The cross is a familiar symbol, broad arms flared at the ends, depicted in vivid crimson against white, clean, symmetrical, and resolute the Templar cross. It stands as one of the most widely recognized symbols in the Western esoteric tradition, etched into countless altars, tombs, and banners. Yet, on the disc, it is altered, or rather, wounded. At its core, the last sigil bears this iconic shape, but with 6 arms instead of 4. The 2 additional arms do not extend cleanly, they slant downwards, asymmetrically, and one appears fractured at the joint. This is not erosion or weathering, but a deliberate break, as if it was never intended to be complete. Templar historians have contemplated the 6-armed variant for decades. It does not appear in any officially sanctioned insignia, nor does it correspond to any heraldic forms used by recognized military orders of the Crusades. Nevertheless, traces of it emerge in unusual locations, faintly carved into stones in abandoned Pyrenean watchposts, sketched on vellum scraps from confiscated trial records, and once unearthed beneath a ruined commandery in Portugal as a sandstone relief, so weathered that only its unnatural symmetry hinted at intentional design. The implications here become disquieting. In Templar symbology, The cross was not merely a badge, it functioned as a metaphysical diagram. Its four arms represented the cardinal directions, the four evangelists, and the elemental pillars of their theology. However, this distorted version violates that sacred geometry, tilting the balance and introducing an anomalous axis. Thus, the questions arise. What does the sixth arm represent, and why was it broken? Some researchers propose it is not a sixth arm at all, but an axis mundi, a vertical anchor symbolizing the descent of the divine into matter. Within this framework, the break is not damage but a dramatic symbol of divine interruption, a collapse in the celestial order. Others suggest a simpler explanation, that it was an esoteric reference, an inner circle cipher never intended for external eyes. The true meanings, they argue, were layered, with one interpretation for the public, another for the order, and a final one for the initiated few. However, a more troubling theory has begun to circulate discreetly and cautiously. It suggests that the cross's fractured state may depict not just symbolic imbalance, but cosmological rupture, meaning the sigil represents not the order, but an event. To contextualize, in 1307, when King Philip IV of France ordered the mass arrest of the Templars, most historians agree that the primary political motivation was financial. Philip was bankrupt, and the Templars were wealthy. Yet, some testimonies from the infamous trials, particularly those extracted under torture, contained bizarre claims. Initiates described ritual processions in which a cross was desecrated, altered, or even corrected. One document mentions a false sign with 6 wings carried into a chamber of rites. Most dismissed these as psychological ravings under due duress. However, if one momentarily accepts the premise that a core faction within the order held beliefs outside of the Church's orthodoxy, the 6-armed cross acquires a darker significance. It transforms into a forbidden symbol, indicating not salvation, but something else, something the Church feared sufficiently to attempt its eradication. An obscure detail warrants attention. In 1903, a fragmentary parchment surfaced in Avignon, written in Old Occitan, now referred to as the Codex Rubis. It describes a splinter group of Templars known as the Vigilants of the Broken Arm. Their existence is debated, with most scholars considering the document a forgery. Nevertheless, it references a ritual object, a sigil of metal with 6 points, one shattered, as a reminder of the breach to come. This phrase, the breach to come, has generated considerable speculation. Was it metaphorical, prophetic, or an encoded reference to a specific event? One must recall Ehrenfeld's decoding of the planetary alignment. If the broken arm correlates to a specific position within that celestial formation, then the damage is not incidental, it is intentional, a marker, a countdown. The scholarly debate, as expected, is intense. Some scholars argue that the 6th point was merely a stylized, ornamental flourish, devoid of deeper significance. However, these same scholars have struggled to explain its absence from any other known artifacts outside this singular thread of suppressed symbols. One theologian even proposed that the sigil could represent a heretical reinterpretation of the crucifix, an inversion of the resurrection narrative. Instead of 4 arms representing balance, 6 points symbolizing disruption, instead of ascent, fragmentation. Furthermore, the shape itself, when geometrically mapped, reveals that the 6-armed cross on the sigil forms a near-perfect overlay with a collapsed stellation diagram. Specifically, it mimics a distorted hexagon, in which one angle has been mathematically folded inward, a structural impossibility in classical geometry, yet permissible in symbolic language. Some have likened it to a fallen star, something once radiant, now bent out of alignment. What does this signify? Esoteric interpretations suggest it points to the fall of a guiding intelligence, not Luciferian in the traditional sense, but the loss of a cosmic axis, a turning away of the divine mechanism that maintains harmony among time, matter, and soul. Such a profound interpretation places considerable weight on a small metallic disc. However, this is not merely any metal disc, it is the last sigil. A crucial connection, which may have been anticipated, brings the discussion back to the indentation mentioned previously, the one suggesting the disc was designed to spin. When rotated around its central axis, the 6-armed cross does not generate a uniform shape. Instead, it produces a stuttered waveform, a pulsation. The broken arm creates a visual skip, akin to a machine with a misaligned gear. Could this skip be the message? Perhaps the Templars believed in the perfect symmetry of the cosmos until they encountered something that shattered that conviction, something they encoded into their final artifact, something for which they broke their own cross to warn humanity. And now, that brokenness appears to be revolving once more, with increasing velocity. Initially, it seemed unremarkable. Another parchment fragment from a collection of judicial archives interred in a dusty storage room near Toulouse. The edges were frayed, the ink partially faded, and the Latin so corrupted it appeared to dissolve into itself. Yet, embedded within those fragmented phrases was a name, not a saint, not a knight, but a brother, an initiate, a man who would become central to one of the most enigmatic disappearances in Templar history. His name, if it was indeed his true appellation, appeared only once in surviving records: Frater Leontius. He was not a grandmaster or a high-ranking dignitary, merely a footnote, a monk who reportedly abandoned his station in 1307, mere weeks prior to the mass arrests of the Templar leadership. The record does not characterize him as a traitor or a heretic. Instead, in a tone both restrained and apprehensive, it labels him with a peculiar phrase, Ultima Sigilli, meaning guardian of the last sigil. For years, historians dismissed this title as a misreading, perhaps referring to a lost charter seal or an esoteric term for relic keeping. However, when the identical phrase resurfaced decades later in a separate ecclesiastical marginal note, this time discovered within an inventory of confiscated Templar items transported to Avignon, it garnered the attention of a smaller, more inquisitive group, the Sigil investigators. The note referred to an item of anomalous designation, deemed too heretical for open display and marked for discreet disposal. Yet, beside that terse description was a single word, intactus, untouched. The item had not been destroyed, it had been spared. And directly beneath that, a short phrase inscribed by a different hand, not to be shown to the fathers. This would all remain speculative, vague inventory commentary were it not for a discovery made in 1993. That year, a private library acquisition in Arles yielded a previously uncatalogued 14-page codex, handwritten in Latin intermingled with Provençal, bound in aged goatskin, and bearing no title. It was subsequently dubbed the Manuscript of the Lost Brother. Its authorship is unsigned, but the internal voice of the text repeatedly references my exile from the order and describes a forbidden object entrusted to my flesh alone. The manuscript details a frantic flight through the Pyrenees, the burial of the circle that speaks, and cryptic instructions that read more like desperate warnings than theological prose. One passage has been roughly translated as, "The sign is not a symbol, it is a sentence spoken not with voice, but with sky. When the sixth light breaks and the host turns away, none shall be ready." The unusual phrasing and syntax, likely a result of unpolished Latin or mental distress, have led scholars to debate its precise interpretation. Some view it as a poetic lamentation. Others believe it describes an astronomical phenomenon, the sixth light, possibly a planetary body or comet, and the host as a metaphysical presence, perhaps even divine. What is particularly striking is the manuscript's repeated insistence that the object was never intended for general access and must be kept beyond even the reach of high initiates. It also references a curious ritual, the silencing of the sixth arm. This rite, if it ever occurred, is described only in fragmented form. It involved the extinguishing of 6 candles placed around a sigil during an eclipse, after which the 6th candle was not merely snuffed but shattered. It was not symbolic, it was a sealing, a breaking of contact. The manuscript then shifts abruptly into a paranoid tone. The author describes visions of mirrored eyes in the stars and refers to a coming concordance of the ends. These phrases, alien as they sound, echo certain apocalyptic writings found centuries earlier among Gnostic and Manichaean sects, particularly those fixated on celestial alignments and cosmological judgment. What lends the document credibility, despite its almost mystical tone, is its direct reference to a Templar location, later confirmed through independent records. The site, a ruined sanctuary near Montségur, is described as the final hollow where I laid the circle down and folded the stone behind me. Excavations in 1997 revealed a sealed chamber beneath that very sanctuary, which, upon opening, was empty save for 2 items, a velvet-lined recess in the stone and a single broken copper hinge. This hinge matched the description from the Bezu box. This connection compels a reconsideration of the chain of custody. If Frater Leontius, this lost brother, truly fled with the sigil and interred it in Montségur, then someone must have exhumed it later and transported it to Bezu. The temporal gap is vast, nearly 7 centuries. Thus, the question arises, who safeguarded it? Who possessed this knowledge? Who continued the vigil? The manuscript offers its most haunting suggestion on its final page, badly burned but still legible. They who watch are not seen. They need no name. They are the eyes between chapters. This is the obscure detail, a reference to a hidden lineage, guardians, perhaps, whose existence is never openly acknowledged. The Church possesses no record of them. The Templar registry, fragmented as it is, makes no mention of a sect within a sect. Yet, the idea persists that while the order collapsed under charges of heresy, a silent few simply vanished, not into death, but into a state of anticipation. The prevailing question facing scholars is whether this manuscript is genuine. Paleographic dating plausibly places it in the early 14th century, but the lack of provenance, the obscure dialect, and the unsettling apocalyptic tone have kept it outside the mainstream canon. Nevertheless, the artifact evidence from Montségur, the coded references in church archives, and the uncanny consistency with the object discovered in Bezu point to a chilling possibility. The manuscript is authentic, and the sigil's journey, far from accidental, was guided by human hands across centuries. If this is the case, then humanity is not dealing with a relic lost to time, but with a message designed to endure it. It commences with a celestial configuration, one not immediately noticeable unless a specific reason compelled observation, unless one possessed a sigil, an object of such antiquity that it predated telescopes, yet of such precision that it charted the invisible. This is a planetary alignment forming not a myth, but a mark, one that has not manifested in nearly 700 years and is predicted to reappear only in 2039. Celestial alignments are a recurring theme in various esoteric traditions, often associated with portals, vortexes, or solar flares. However, this particular alignment is distinct. It does not pertain to vague energies or hopeful vibrations. It is a mathematically precise, astronomically inevitable arrangement that unfolds like a celestial lock clicking into place. And the sigil, the disk to which we are continually drawn, contains within its markings the blueprint for this very moment. Revisiting the outer ring, Dr. Ehrenfeld, the German astrophysicist, determined that the sigil's etchings mapped to syzygy. His calculations aligned not with a minor planetary waltz, but with a highly specific formation predicted for August 4th, 2039. On this date, Mercury, Mars, and Saturn will achieve an unusually tight triangular alignment near the Virgo-Leo boundary, one of the most mythologically significant regions of the sky. Furthermore, if the sigil's radial lines are interpreted as angular divisions, they intersect this constellation with disconcerting accuracy. Some might dismiss this, stating that planetary alignments are common. While true, this particular alignment mirrors another that occurred in 1347, precisely 728 years prior. That date is historically significant as the inception of the Black Death in Europe. While correlation does not imply causation, the Templars may not have differentiated. For them, celestial patterns served as echoes, as warnings the heavens repeating their refrains. The situation becomes more unsettling. In certain suppressed Templar texts, primarily fragments preserved in the Vatican's restricted archive, veiled references exist to what they termed the Great Convergence. This phrase appears in connection with celestial observations, but the texts are maddeningly vague, speaking of the stars lining their heads once more, and the shadow of Mars upon the countenance of the lion. Most scholars dismiss these lines as poetic obscurantism. However, when viewed in conjunction with the sigil's alignments, they begin to coalesce into a more coherent message. One phrase in particular stands out: when Saturn lowers his crown in Virgo, the seal shall stir. One need not subscribe to prophecy to find this unsettling, as Saturn will indeed be entering Virgo during the 2039 alignment. A coincidence, perhaps. Yet, there is further evidence. One of the sigil's outermost rings is engraved with a small series of 28 indentations. Initially, these were thought to represent lunar phases. However, it was observed that when aligned with the ephemeris tables for 2039, these indentations correlate precisely with the planetary transits for that month, not approximately, but with exactitude. This raises an uncomfortable possibility. The disk was not merely encoded with star maps, but may have been designed to activate, symbolically or ritually, when those celestial conditions were met. It could function as a celestial switch, a form of astrological doomsday clock, its hour hand now inexorably moving towards midnight. This, of course, brings the discussion to the prophecy itself. The term prophecy often implies prediction and certainty, and history is replete with erroneous forecasts. However, in the medieval understanding, prophecy was not necessarily about foreseeing the future, but about recognizing recurring cycles. To them, history was not linear, but cyclical, akin to the heavens, revolving repeatedly. When the same celestial configurations recurred, similar consequences followed. A minor scroll discovered in the archives of Toledo, dated approximately 1325, contains an eerie Latin verse: Quam steli redent in ordinum fractum, et sextus lumen, ceterit tunc lux versa, erit infam et sigillum ultimum clamit. Loosely translated, this reads, "When the stars return to the broken order, and the sixth light falls, then shall light turn to iron, and the last sigil shall cry out." This is an obscure detail, certainly. Yet, when cross-referenced with the sigil's broken sixth arm, the phrase "sixth light" no longer sounds like mere symbolic embellishment. It suggests that someone understood a particular celestial pattern held profound significance, that it triggered a specific event. Scholarly debate regarding this passage persists. Some interpret light turned to iron as a reference to war. Others believe it to be alchemical, signifying the transformation of spirit into matter or vice versa. A few even suggest it refers to magnetism, though this interpretation is admittedly marginal. What is clear, however, is the recurring language of return of something coming back. Not just stars, but conditions, events, and consequences. Recalling Frater Leontius, the lost brother, his manuscript hinted at a similar concept, that the sigil was not a relic, but a sentence, not a message about a moment in time, but a moment itself, encoded, frozen, awaiting its utterance by the stars. And perhaps now the reasons for his flight, his concealment of the object, and its subsequent retrieval and resealing in Bezu become clearer, for the prophecy was not concerned with their time, but with ours. It is difficult to maintain detached objectivity at this juncture. There is an unsettling quality to contemplating the stars, knowing they will soon align like keys in a lock. There is a sense of finality to it. While debates continue regarding the sigil's meaning, the cosmos continues its motion, indifferent to human beliefs. His execution was protracted. On March 18, 1314, just before sunset, on an island in the Seine, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, stood chained to a wooden post, the flames ascending with the deliberate solemnity of a state execution. Eyewitness accounts indicate he did not cry out, but gazed directly at the horizon as the fire consumed him. Just before the heat irrevocably silenced him, he spoke. His final words have resonated through history, embellished in myth and dramatized in literature. Pope Clement, King Philip, I summon you to the judgment of God. Both men, remarkably, died within the year. The curse, if one chooses to term it such, endured. However, a less widely known detail, recorded in less poetic corners of historical archives, indicates these were not his sole pronouncements. According to a single document preserved in the private archives of the Abbé de Saint-Denis, now held in restricted storage at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, de Molay's complete statement was more extensive, not a curse, but a warning. Translated from Latin, it reads, "The time of shadow returns, and the stars prepare again their shape. You have silenced the guardians, but the sky remembers." One might inquire why such a statement, if authentic, remained unnoticed for centuries, absent from early chroniclers' accounts. The answer may lie with its transcriber. The manuscript in question is unsigned, but was found among a bundle of personal notes belonging to a monk named Father Eligius, a Benedictine scribe known for his obsessive meticulousness in documenting execution details. Eligius had a reputation for recording what others preferred to omit. He documented the exact breath counts during the slow strangulation of a Cathar heretic, and once devoted 3 pages to describing the scent of scorched hair. His account of de Molay's death was never published, yet within his notes lies a singular, hastily scrolled paragraph in the margin. He turned not to the king, nor to the priest. he looked upward, and he spoke of the sky. This represents the sole surviving written source that directly links de Molay to astronomical symbolism, fundamentally altering the historical perspective. For if the Grand Master did indeed refer to the stars preparing their shape, then the sigil was not an isolated artifact, but doctrine, a truth preserved by the highest echelons of the order, a secret carried to the pyre. This brings forth a significant historical fact often overlooked in the Templar narrative. In the months preceding the arrests, de Molay undertook an unusual journey. He traveled to Limousin, stopping at several minor commanderies, none of which were considered strategically vital. Among them was a secluded chapel outside Brillero, long rumored to house a library of forbidden texts. Records from that visit are sparse, but one phrase survives in a local land registry, updated shortly thereafter, a relic not to be moved. No description, no context, merely those 6 words. Some researchers posit that this relic was the last sigil, or a copy thereof. The obscure detail that few historians connect is de Molay's multifaceted role. He was not merely the military commander of the order, but also its highest ritual authority. He supervised all initiation ceremonies for senior members, and during his tenure, the Templars altered a portion of their private liturgy. A version of the Rite of the Sword was shortened, and a new element introduced, a moment of silence beneath the night sky. The reason for this alteration was never recorded. One surviving version of this revised rite contains a curious instruction. When the stars align with the broken sign, the mouth shall not speak. This may have been intended as a metaphor, or perhaps it was an encoded instruction, an initiatory clue for those entrusted with preserving something sacred and profoundly perilous. A larger question, which continues to divide even the most sympathetic Templar scholars, is, what did de Molay believe was impending? Was the prophecy he referenced apocalyptic in a religious sense, the return of Christ, the end of an age, or was it something else entirely, something neither wholly divine nor entirely human? Let us revisit the phrase, "the sky remembers." In esoteric Templar writings, largely suppressed after the arrests, the heavens were not merely viewed as a canvas of God's creation. They were perceived as a record, a clock, a scroll of divine recurrence. The stars did not merely shine, they signaled, they remembered. And the sigil, if interpreted correctly, possessed the capability to read them. This might elucidate why de Molay spoke nothing of earthly vengeance. He did not curse his adversaries with pestilence or fire. He pointed upward. He invoked not justice, but alignment. This leads to the ultimate mystery. Following de Molay's execution, an unusual document surfaced within a small monastery in Aragon. It was unsigned, but bore the Templar seal. It read, "The key has turned. The last guardian has spoken. The rest shall lie in shadow until the wheel returns." It was not widely circulated and disappeared from public record for nearly 600 years. Yet, when Langlais opened that sealed box in Bézieux in 2001, he is reported to have written only one sentence in his personal notes before receding into silence. The wheel is turning again. A subtle connection, perhaps, or a confirmation that de Molay's perception was accurate, that the stars he referenced were not metaphorical but mechanistic. Therefore, when envisioning the flames engulfing him, one should not picture a defeated man. Instead, imagine a man observing the sky, not in fear, but in recognition, as if the fire did not consume him but initiated the subsequent turn of the wheel. And now, that wheel approaches its completion once more. The Vatican archives are often imagined as a repository of aged tomes, a vault of yellowed parchments, and theological footnotes. However, behind its austere stone facade lies a more assiduously guarded and curated labyrinth. Within those depths, not merely holy scripture or papal decrees are preserved, but a record of what the Church deemed humanity was not prepared to comprehend. Among these forgotten shelves, in a climate-controlled drawer 3 levels beneath the Sala Indices, rests a collection of trial transcripts that, by all logic, should not have survived. These are collectively known as the Confession Scrolls. Dated between 1308 and 1311, they document portions of the arduous Inquisition against the Knights Templar, comprising hundreds of testimonies extracted under various, often brutal, forms of persuasion. The Church would later disavow some of these methods, but the documents remained archived, redacted, and sealed. In 1913, Pope Pius authorized a discreet internal inventory of unexamined Templar records. The team included a young Jesuit scholar named Lorenzo Gaspari. He possessed a talent for languages, an affinity for forbidden texts, and a remarkably brief career. For what Gaspari discovered, and what he attempted to publish before being silenced, was a scroll labeled De Septimo Signaculo of the Seventh Seal. To be precise, this is not a direct reference to the biblical apocalypse. The scroll's contents, to the limited extent publicly known, describe a rite performed in silence beneath the lion's stars by the anointed few who held no banner. The document is fragmented, scorched in parts, and written in a peculiar hybrid of ecclesiastical Latin and Occitan. It does not explicitly name the sigil, but it speaks of the circle of broken symmetry and the iron tongue that speaks only when the stars align. Gaspari immediately recognized that this was not standard heresy. This was not idol worship, inverted prayers, or peculiar rituals involving felines. This was cosmology, prophecy, a form of dark astronomy veiled in medieval theological codes. He attempted to present his findings at a Jesuit academic symposium in 1914, but was politely removed from the panel. His personal notes were confiscated, and his license to teach theology was revoked. A year later, he entered monastic silence. He died in 1947, alone and unpublished. Yet his insights were not entirely lost, for one page of his notes survived. It was preserved by a friend and smuggled out of the Vatican, hidden within the pages of a borrowed book. That single page, now termed the Gaspari leaf, contains a paraphrase of what he claimed was the scroll's final stanza. And when the crowned slow star returns, and the sixth cross is seen cracked, let not the fathers look skyward, for the sign shall not ask permission. It is not scripture, it is a warning. Furthermore, in the mid-1990 seconds, as part of a limited Vatican transparency initiative, a select group of researchers was granted digital access to scanned microfilm reels of these Templar documents. However, when scholars reviewed the reel labeled Trial Series 17 Amperes, a peculiar anomaly appeared, a 6-page sequence entirely blacked out, not merely missing but present in form yet obliterated in content. 6 sheets, each marked with the Vatican seal, each stamped with a single word, "Seller be silent." This is where the central question emerges. What information was contained on those 6 pages? Why were they entirely redacted? And why were they physically preserved rather than destroyed? Some posit that these pages contain testimony from high-ranking Templars, not merely concerning doctrine, but regarding a calendar or esoteric clock that indicated a future celestial event. Others believe they included references to an actual object described in terms similar to the sigil. And one whispered theory, never published and consistently denied, alleges that within those lines was a map not of land, but of stars. Naturally, none of this can be definitively confirmed. The Vatican has since restricted all access to the original microfilm, citing degradation. The reel itself has mysteriously disappeared. Only 2 verified scans survive, and these do not include the blacked-out section. However, what is more difficult to suppress is the increasing number of convergences. We now have the Bezu discovery, the Leontius manuscript, the astronomical alignment decoded from the sigil, de Molay's final skyward utterance, and now potentially the Church's own evidence of their knowledge that they redacted the scroll not because it was blasphemous, but because it was accurate. Here is the obscure detail, often overlooked. Vatican records employ a very specific code for cataloging forbidden documents. It is a 3-part identifier: category, subtype, and status. The code on the De Septimo Signaculo scroll, as recorded in Gaspari's surviving notes, is excat obscura in vigil, translated roughly as outside category, hidden under watch. The term in vigil is not standard. It appears only in a handful of ecclesiastical contexts, consistently implying long-term surveillance. It signifies not merely locked away but monitored. Thus, the sigil was not simply interred, it was tracked. This leads to a grim possibility. What if its rediscovery was not an accident? What if someone within the Church, or closely affiliated with it, knew its precise location? What if they permitted its surfacing at the opportune moment, not to reconceal it, but to prepare for what it signifies? For this is the quietest, darkest thought of all. Perhaps the sigil was never intended to remain hidden indefinitely. Perhaps the sky had to be ready. The clock had to run down. The stars had to fall into place, and now they have. There are languages that are spoken, and then there are languages that are felt, languages that require neither grammar nor alphabet, but rather recognition, akin to recalling a face seen only in a dream. This is the essence of what the sigil's outermost ring appears to communicate. It does not invite reading, it resonates. At first glance, its markings seem purely decorative, tiny, tick-like grooves, unevenly spaced, some deeper than others. They form no obvious letters, no recognizable script, and no repeating pattern. However, as with many aspects of the sigil, meaning emerges only when one shifts perspective, tilts it, and repositions the light. Suddenly, the grooves seem to animate, like a frozen frequency awaiting vibration. The breakthrough originated not from a historian, but from Dr. Antonia Roux, a linguist specializing in medieval initiation rites. She had dedicated 2 decades to studying esoteric symbols embedded in liturgical garments and monastic architecture. Her primary fascination, however, was what she termed ritual compression, the encoding of complex theological ideas into visual shorthand symbols that held one meaning for the outer circle, another for the inner, and something entirely different for the select few. In 2005, Roux received a grainy photograph of the sigil's outer band, courtesy of a former student discreetly investigating the Bezout site. She perceived not noise, but syntax. What Roux identified was a pattern consistent with a class of codes known as substitution matrices, grids in which a symbol or position substitutes for a concept. These were extensively utilized by mystical societies, including certain Cistercian enclaves and, most compellingly, late-period Templars. She cross-referenced the groove sequence against known Templar initiation ciphers, particularly those from the final degree, the highest echelon of the inner circle. This was not the stuff of popular fiction. These ciphers were genuine, attested to in surviving confessions, and discovered in fragments on ceremonial objects. Most were geometrical in nature: lines, dots, intersecting angles. Roux precisely matched 5 sequences from the sigil to entries in an obscure 1311 document, now catalogued in Portugal's National Archive as the Carta de Luz Velada, or Charter of the Veiled Light. This document had previously been dismissed as symbolic gibberish, a feverish record of an initiation rite lost to time. But now, with the sigil as key, its meaning became accessible. One sequence on the sigil matched the cipher for vigil, another for silent watch, and a third, more complex and jagged, aligned with a phrase Roux had previously been unable to fully translate. Star wheel reaches rest. The implications were profound. This was not merely decorative art or mathematical abstraction. The sigil's outer ring appeared to encode a final message, reserved for those who had traversed the last veil of initiation, not knights, not even masters, but only those deemed prepared for the darkest knowledge. What constitutes this knowledge? The Carta describes the final degree not as a ceremony of ascension, but one of contraction. The initiate is not granted new vision, but is compelled to close their eyes. One line reads, "He who has seen the sign must carry silence in his bones. The stars will speak louder than we may." This is the obscure detail, the true nature of the final rite. It did not reveal cosmic truth. It instructed its guardians to prepare for something that could not be articulated, a knowledge not meant to be shared, only endured. This interpretation is consistent with the sigil's observed behavior. As noted in earlier discussions, the disc appears to react to light and angle. Some suspect it may have been designed to align with a very specific starlight or solar positioning. One theory from an unpublished Vatican draft, partially translated by Langley, speculates that the sigil activates symbolically when the heavens precisely match its engravings, that the cipher is not intended to be read in isolation, but in context. If this holds true, it leads to a chilling conclusion. The sigil's message may not have been fully decipherable until the present time. This brings the discussion back to Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master and apparent martyr. His final revisions to the order's rituals included a peculiar stipulation. During the 3rd night of initiation, candidates were to be led blindfolded beneath an open sky and asked a single question, whispered by a masked figure. "Do you remember the star that does not move?" The reference to Polaris is evident. However, if Roux's interpretation is correct, this was not a literal question but a test of conceptual symmetry. Polaris, unlike the wandering planets, is fixed, constant, the unmoving pivot of the northern heavens. In the ciphered traditions of the inner order, it represented the silent witness, the idea that cosmic truth does not manifest loudly. It waits, it observes. This concept of silent surveillance echoes both the redacted Vatican scrolls and the concluding line in the Leontius manuscript, "They who watch are not seen." If these watchers existed, and if they utilized the sigil as a form of encoded instruction manual, then the cipher may be more than merely a prophecy. It may represent a ritual timeline. Some researchers now believe that each segment of the outer ring corresponds to a time period, a phase or a watch, a turning of the wheel. The final segment, thinner than the rest, aligns with the August 2039 celestial convergence previously discussed. It constitutes the last component of the pattern, the final watch. Naturally, the scholarly community remains divided. Some argue that Rue's cipher interpretations are excessively speculative, her connections circumstantial. Others contend that medieval societies were fascinated by hidden messages, and any resemblance is coincidental. However, the existence of the Carta de Luz Velada is undeniable, as is the fact that its phrases, long considered nonsensical, now mirror engraved symbols on an object interred in 1307 and unearthed centuries later. One skeptic remarked that it could be a very elaborate coincidence. Rue's retort was, "So is a bullet and a heart valve, if they meet by accident." The lingering question is whether the cipher was intended to be broken, or if it was a lock never meant to be reopened. For if the sigil's outer ring constituted a coded message reserved for the final watchers, and if that message points not merely to prophecy but to active participation, then humanity is no longer solely an observer of the sigil's mystery. It has become its inheritor. The desert wind does not speak, yet it retains memory. In Cairo's ancient quarter, nestled behind a crumbling madrasa and the rusted framework of a 12th century gate, lies a fragment of a forgotten archive, an annex of Dar al-Kutub, Egypt's national library, where rare manuscripts slowly degrade in perennial twilight. It was here in 1926 that Otto Reichenbach, a German Orientalist, unearthed a collection of scrolls, never intended for the scrutiny of European scholarship. They were inscribed in a peculiar blend of Arabic and Syriac, and among them, one volume particularly captured his attention, Al-Tajamu al-Tawaku al-Nujum, roughly translated as the completion of the celestial awaiting. This title alone might have passed unnoticed had it not contained a series of diagrams, mandala-like illustrations featuring intersecting geometries and planetary sigils. However, it was one specific shape that captivated Reichenbach, a six-armed cross, with one arm broken, surrounded by glyphs disturbingly similar to those found on the Bezu sigil. This detail never made it into his official notes, as Reichenbach died quietly before he could present his findings. His papers were subsequently boxed and dispatched to his widow, who sold them en masse to a private collector in Geneva. For decades, the collection remained unexamined until 2008, when Dr. Yvon Montre, a French archaeologist, traced it to a storage vault in Zurich. Inside, still pressed between tissue-thin folders, were high-resolution rubbings and sketches of the Cairo scroll, including a complete rendering of the anomalous cross and the heading above it, Al-Kir, the final seal. Here lies a pertinent historical fact. During the 12th and 13th centuries, the Templars established numerous points of contact with Islamic scholars, particularly during truces and prisoner exchanges. The renowned Templar stronghold of Safed in modern-day Israel was not merely a military fortress. It was a site of negotiation and, according to some accounts, study. Although the official church position advocated theological supremacy, Templar leadership frequently sought knowledge wherever it could be found. Some even maintained private correspondences with Sufi mystics. One document preserved in Palermo's Royal Library describes a discussion of the heavens held between a Templar knight and a muwaqqit, an Islamic timekeeper responsible for determining prayer hours through celestial observation. Their dialogue focused not on salvation, but on Saturn. Why Saturn? Why the slowest, most distant of the visible planets? Because to both Muslim astronomers and Templar mystics, Saturn represented the boundary, the edge of divine influence, the final threshold before the unknown. This brings forth the concept of the Black Sun, a term that has endured centuries of misinterpretation. The Black Sun, Shams al-Aswad, was not originally a Nazi symbol or an occult fantasy. In early Egyptian astronomy and Babylonian stellar theology, it referred to a dark alignment, a moment when the outer planets cast their shadows across Earth, not physically, but metaphysically, an era of delay, of pause, of silence from the heavens. The scroll Reichenbach discovered in Cairo described a moment in which the dark crown of Saturn shall press upon the head of Virgo, and the iron tongue will awaken. This phrase should resonate as familiar by now. It is almost identical to the apocalyptic line from the De Septimo Signaculo scroll in the Vatican archives, a similarity too close to be coincidental. This represents the obscure detail, the transmission of symbology across forbidden divides. Somehow, despite the religious chasm between Christian knights and Muslim astrologers, both sides recorded the same shape, the same timing, the same stellar forecast, not as rivals, but as witnesses. Therefore, the question arises, how did this knowledge travel from Cairo to Carcassonne? This remains an open query. In 1273, a Templar vessel departed from Acre under the command of a man known only as Frater B. His logbook, if authentic, was discovered in the wreck of a salt freighter near Marseille in 1959. It references a dark mirror taken from the east and its intended delivery to the sanctuary beyond Montségur, which places it squarely in Cathar territory. That region, already a hotbed of theological dissent, may have provided the ideal hiding place for a relic deemed too dangerous to keep in Templar strongholds. And Carcassonne, the fortified city northeast of Bézieux and a short distance from Rennes-le-Château, historically contained an unusually high number of Templar initiates per capita. Local oral histories, often dismissed by historians as fanciful peasant tales, speak of men of the Red Cross guarding the stars beneath the stone. These same tales describe a disk of heaven cracked by silence. A coherent arc begins to emerge. Cairo, with its black sun scroll and planetary alignments. Then the Mediterranean voyage. Then Bézieux. Then silence. And, perhaps most significantly, one observes the convergence of esoteric systems. In the east, the black sun as a cosmological boundary. In the west, the sigil as a countdown. Two traditions, separated by creed, yet united by a common pattern. The implication is profound. The Templars may not have originated the prophecy. They may have inherited it, which would render the last sigil not a creation, but a continuation, a vessel not of belief, but of transmission. It represents the medium through which a celestial warning, spanning cultures, languages, and centuries, was preserved. And if this is accurate, then the sigil's re-emergence in the 21st century is not merely timely, it is meticulously timed. For as the 2039 alignment approaches, the black sun returns, the slow crown of Saturn descends again, and the watchers, whoever they may be, once more lean in, awaiting. The atmospheric conditions shift upon entering Italy. While the language changes, the underlying prophecy remains consistent. Long before the Templars etched warnings into metal, and prior to Islamic astronomers charting the dark crown of Saturn, there existed the Sibyls, mystic prophetesses who delivered riddles from shadowed caverns. These figures were not priestesses or seers in the modern sense. Rather, they were regarded as vessels, mouthpieces for divine truths, intended not to comfort but to disquiet. Though pagan, their traditions were tolerated by the early church just long enough to be absorbed, assimilated, and ultimately suppressed. Nevertheless, fragments persist, and one in particular emerges from the past to align with the form of the sigil. This is the Cumaean warning, found in a partial copy of the Oracula Sibyllina, dated approximately to the 2nd century CE, but recopied and annotated throughout the medieval period. The relevant passage, obscured within a deluge of apocalyptic metaphor, reads, "When 6 points pierce the wheel of stars, and the watchers blink not beneath Virgo's gaze, a silence shall descend upon man's tongue. The iron mark shall stir, and the order of heaven turn backward." It would be tempting, perhaps too tempting, to dismiss this as mere poetic coincidence. Classical prophecy is, after all, notorious for its layered ambiguities. However, a crucial detail emerges. In 1321, an anonymous marginal note was appended beside this stanza in a Latin manuscript housed at Monte Cassino. It simply states, "Templum, fractum, sigillum novissimum, broken temple, last sigil." Scholars concur that this is no coincidence. The historical fact is that the Templars were known to have translated and preserved select classical texts. Their scribes frequently worked in multilingual scriptoria, particularly in commanderies near Muslim-controlled territories, where Greco-Arabic scientific manuscripts were abundant. The presence of a Sibylline fragment in a Templar archive is therefore within the realm of possibility. The situation becomes even more intriguing with another marginal note, this one discovered in a damaged volume held at the Abbey of Farfa. It suggests that certain Templars considered the Sibylline books not as pagan heresy, but as veiled prophecy, originating from the same divine source they worshipped. God, the monk wrote, speaks not only through saints but through echoes, and what better echo than the stars? This brings forth the obscure detail, a parchment discovered in Avignon in 1967, folded between pages of unrelated land tax record. It bore no title but included a diagram, a circle with 6 spokes, one broken and a Latin phrase beneath, Oracula rotum sicut astra attemput fam stronget. This translates as, prophecies turn as the stars do, and time, like iron, will break itself. The symbolic resonance is eerie. The 6-armed wheel, one arm broken, references to iron and silence, the proximity of Virgo, the repetition of themes across radically distinct traditions. This convergence points not to cultural coincidence, but to a deeper underlying pattern. The open scholarly debate, however, lies in interpretation. Some argue that the Sibylline fragments were misinterpreted, recontextualized through a medieval Christian lens to justify apocalyptic expectations. They suggest that the Templars, under duress from persecution and betrayal, began to perceive themselves as guardians of a cosmic truth, appropriating symbols from diverse sources to construct a narrative of final warning. Others propose a more unsettling hypothesis, that the Templars were not merely fabricating myths from panic, but were responding to an actual tradition. They encountered a lineage of thought that extended from Delphic utterances to Babylonian stargazers, through Sufi mystics and Coptic scribes, all referencing the same event. A celestial turning, a fracture in the temporal order. Where does the sigil fit into this? If one subscribes to the convergence theory, then the sigil serves as the medium, a condensation of eschatological ideas transmitted through centuries of sacred geometry. It is not merely a Templar relic, but a glyph encoded with ancient expectation. Dr. Silvano Marchesi of the University of Bologna went so far as to claim that the sigil is a Sibylline engine, a symbolic device intended to fulfill prophecy not through speech, but through precision. The Sibyls sang the song, he wrote. The Templars built the instrument. This theory would be readily dismissed were it not for one final detail. In the Vatican's restricted index, beneath a now sealed category once designated clausus obscura, lies an inventory of confiscated items from 1,312. One item is described as a wheel of iron engraved with stars and notations, suspected of demonic origin. The attached note indicates it to be of Eastern design, but mentioned in the writings of the Sibyl. The document, now redacted, was signed by none other than Cardinal Bertrand de Got, later crowned Pope Clement V, the very pope who orchestrated the Templars' downfall. The connection is clear. He did not merely destroy them, he appropriated something he knew. Thus, the question arises, were the Sibyls simply mythical madwomen, or were they early messengers of a pattern none were meant to recognize? And if so, why is it still unfolding? The stars possess no religion, no doctrine, no allegiances, but they do possess memory, and it appears they too are spiraling towards a specific outcome. It is secured in a locked drawer within a private collection, far removed from museums and institutional scrutiny. Its value lies not in traditional monetary terms, but in what it reflects, or rather, what it once reflected. The object is a mirror, roughly oval, approximately the size of a human face, set within a frame of obsidian black glass. The reverse side bears an etching, not a name, not a prayer, but a pattern. For those who have followed this investigative journey, the nature of this pattern is familiar. 6 arms, one broken, the sigil. Its provenance leads to a name frequently whispered in the shadows of European mystery: Mary Magdalene. More precisely, it leads to the legends surrounding her, the whispered myths of her journey to southern Gaul after the crucifixion, the sacred feminine she purportedly embodied, and the guardians who watched over her relics. However, the present inquiry does not pursue bloodlines or apocryphal romances. It follows the trail of an artifact rumored to be held by a group of guardians situated outside Rennes-le-Château, the same region where Templars once constructed commanderies and concealed their deceased in catacombs that remain largely unmapped, the identical ground where the box containing the last sigil was sealed behind the Bézu altar. The mirror surfaced in the late 19th century when an obscure cleric, Abbé Duret, mentioned it in a letter to a fellow antiquarian. He claimed it had been preserved by a secretive order of nuns, les filles de l'ombre, the daughters of the shadow, who traced their lineage to the Magdalene's companions. According to the letter, the mirror was utilized during nocturnal rites to observe the return of the seal, and here the narrative becomes peculiar. The abbé described the mirror not as a passive object, but as reactive. He asserted that under specific astronomical alignments, particularly when Mars ascended beneath Virgo in late summer, the mirror would reveal not the one who looks, but the one who waits. Predictably, historians dismissed this as pious hallucination. Duret was labeled unstable, and his letters filed under folk legend. However, in 1972, the mirror reappeared in the possession of a reclusive Belgian collector who permitted a select group of scholars to examine it. The obsidian frame matched volcanic glass from a quarry in Anatolia, a site frequented by early Gnostic cults. The engraving on the back precisely matched the radial curvature and central geometry of the Bezu sigil. Now for the obscure detail. Under polarized light, the mirror's surface reveals faint inscriptions invisible to the naked eye. These are not words, but points mapping constellations, yet not random ones. When charted, they correspond to the celestial configuration as it would appear on August 4th, 2039. Again, that specific date. This raises a disquieting question. If the sigil is a record, then the mirror may have been the medium, a vessel through which the encoded knowledge of the Templars, or their predecessors, could be observed. Not read, not interpreted, but seen. Some have likened it to a scrying device, but that term oversimplifies its nature. What the mirror reflects is not future or past in the conventional sense. It is a configuration, an alignment, as if its sole purpose is to respond when the heavens assume a particular arrangement. Consider this: the mirror was consistently kept face down, wrapped in black silk, stored in cedar boxes, and concealed behind altars or beneath floorboards. This was not because it was sacred, but because it was deemed dangerous. This notion recurs repeatedly in the disparate documents pertaining to the mirror, warnings to keep it covered, instructions that it must only be unwrapped beneath silent stars, accounts from initiates who gazed into it and claimed to perceive shapes, movements, and patterns that echoed through their dreams for years afterward. Skepticism is natural, but here is the crucial link. Several of these accounts describe what they witnessed not as a vision, but as a fracture, a breaking of symmetry. One individual described the moment as a sound without sound in the shape of a wheel. Another simply wrote, "The sky turned black and said nothing," recalling the ciphered initiation text from the Carta de Luz Velada, which instructed, "He who has seen the sign must carry silence in his bones." The connection grows stronger and more deliberate. This mirror, if it is indeed what the nuns and the abbé believed, was not a relic of Mary Magdalene at all, or rather, it was never inherently hers. It may have passed through the hands of her followers, preserved as a sacred object, and reinterpreted as a divine mystery, but its fundamental function predates any Christian myth. Its geometry is older, colder, celestial, and that opens an even deeper question: who created it? The craftsmanship of the frame does not align with medieval techniques. The black glass is unusually smooth for the period, more akin to obsidian polished by Mesoamerican artisans than by European monastics. And the etching, laser-precise yet without lasers, presents a paradox. A recent unpublished analysis, discreetly conducted by a private conservation laboratory, dated the obsidian surface to at least the 12th century. However, the tools employed to shape it remain unknown. No chisel marks, no tooling residue, merely a single, perfect form, reflective and dark, bearing an engraving that no known contemporary could have created, save perhaps those who comprehended not merely form, but function. What if the mirror was never intended for self-reflection? What if its purpose was to reveal something one was not meant to perceive? Not prophecy, not deities, but timing. What if the sigil is the code, and the mirror is the reader? This would elucidate why the two objects, separated by geography and function, share the identical broken geometry. Why both reference the same celestial date? Why the deepest rituals of the Templar inner circle referred not to revelation, but to reflection? For if one observes the sigil for an extended period, one does not merely perceive stars. One begins to feel observed not by God, not by angels, but by the sky itself. It commences with music, not a melody one might hum or a composition that resonates beneath cathedral domes, but a deeper, more enigmatic resonance, a vibration embedded within language, rhythm, and chant. This is the type of music that ancient orders believed could alter the world, not through melodic expression, but through alignment. Within such a chant, discovered partially erased on goatskin vellum in the ruins of a Templar priory near Freiburg, lies perhaps the most cryptic clue in the entire sigil mystery. A chant without a name, an unknown composer, and no recognized liturgical application. Scholars now refer to it simply as the seal of the angelic war. To establish the historical context, in 1891, during a winter excavation in the Black Forest, archaeologists recovered fragments of a musical manuscript stored inside a wooden reliquary box. Initially, it appeared to be a typical monastic antiphon. However, certain irregularities were apparent. The notation employed an archaic pneumatic system predating Gregorian script. The language was not entirely Latin. It oscillated between Latin roots, Aramaic inflections, and what appeared to be a constructed code, a form of musical cipher. What drew particular attention was not the melody, but the imagery. Etched into the top corner of the vellum was a peculiar circular diagram, 6 lines radiating outwards like a star, with the top spoke jagged, deliberately broken. The significance of this broken element is now understood. The accompanying chant, described in fluid, parallel phrasing, spoke of a wheel of silence, a battle without voices, and the mark that binds the host of the upper sky. It was structured as a call and response, yet the responder's part was conspicuously absent, silent, entirely blank, as if the second voice had been erased or was never intended for human audition. This is where the obscure detail becomes critical. Templar musical rites are seldom discussed. Most assumptions posit their rituals as predominantly martial and architectural. However, recently translated documents suggest the order practiced a unique form of chant, reserved exclusively for initiates of the inner circle. These were not hymns of praise or repentance. They were calibrations, rituals of resonance designed to mirror the structure of the stars. The Freiburg fragment appears to reference one ritual above all others, Luer Dixum Rayon, or the sealing of the 6th ray. A companion parchment, found nearby, contains a short passage in flowing script, now partially lost to decay. The legible portion reads, "When the 6th ray is severed, the host shall not descend. Only the sign shall speak." In angelology, the term host refers to celestial beings, warriors, or forces of divine order. In this context, the host shall not descend implies a failure of connection, a celestial silence, as if something destined to arrive does not. This aligns disturbingly well with the phrasing from the Sibylline warnings and, once again, with Frater Leontius's apprehensive writings. When the 6th light breaks and the host turns away, what are all these sources describing a war that never materializes, a silence where thunder should resonate? The phrase angelic war typically evokes images of trumpet-blaring archangels engaged in combat with demons. Yet, in the chant, the conflict is internal, not between beings, but between harmony and fracture, between the expected celestial music and the terrible moment when that song falters. And recalling the mirror, the reflections that did not correspond to the viewer, the celestial silence, these echoes manifest the same apprehension, not of invasion, but of disconnection, of being severed from something vast, structural, cosmological. Dr. Helena Chazarus of the University of Salamanca interpreted the chant as a mourning rite, not for the deceased, but for the fallen order of heaven itself. The chant does not summon angels, she wrote. It grieves their silence. And here is the unexpected element. Chazarus discovered a similar 6-armed symbol in a 10th century Mozarabic manuscript, hidden within a marginal illumination. It featured the same broken radial pattern, the identical missing upper spoke. However, in that version, the central circle bore a single, barely visible word in ink, obivit. It means it fell silent. The open question therefore arises, was the sigil intended to herald some form of divine return, or to mark the moment when divine order definitively ceased communication? For if the chant is authentic and the musical alignment intentional, it fundamentally alters the interpretation. It transforms the sigil from a countdown into a eulogy, not for humanity, but for the very architecture of the cosmos, a cosmic circuit breaker, a ritual marker of when the music ceased. The implications are unsettling. The broken sixth arm of the sigil may not symbolize physical destruction or earthly chaos. It may represent silence, the failure of alignment, the moment when the harmonic code of the universe collapses by a mere fraction sufficient to alter everything. Cazarus's final translation of the chant concludes with the lines, "The sixth fell, the seventh closed, the host wept behind glass, and the wheel turned alone." This closely echoes the language from the Leontius manuscript, the circle that speaks and the silence that follows. The connection tightens. The fragments dispersed across chant, metal, cipher, and prophecy all point to the same fracture. Not an apocalypse of fire and fury, but an apocalypse of withdrawal, the quiet collapse of something so fundamental that its absence may go unnoticed until it is irretrievably gone. And what remains thereafter? Only the sigil, only the wheel still turning. Numbers are often perceived as infallible, a comforting myth humanity embraces amidst the cold expanse of uncertainty. Mathematics is considered pristine, pure, eternal. Yet, what transpires when numbers begin to murmur? Let us return to the sigil. Its physical form, celestial alignments, and broken symmetry have been examined. However, a deeper aspect exists. Beneath the curves, arms, and engraved glyphs, beneath the ciphered outer band and the fractured cross, lies a structure of such mathematical precision that it has begun to shift the focus of contemporary researchers from what the sigil signifies to what it does. The breakthrough did not originate from historians, but from Dr. Leonard Duquesne, a Swiss-born computational theorist with no prior involvement in relics or prophecy. He first encountered the sigil during a guest lecture at the École Normale Supérieure in 2015 as a blurry image on a student's presentation slide. While most viewers perceived an ancient metal object, Duquesne identified ratios. He requested access to high-resolution scans of the artifact, utilizing leaked copies quietly circulating among academic forums, and subjected them to a pattern recognition model typically employed for analyzing cryptographic overlays in ancient papyri. What emerged astonished him. The angles between each arm of the sigil, including the fractured sixth, formed a repeating sequence of prime numbers embedded within a golden ratio spiral. The spacing of notches around the outer ring, though seemingly irregular, aligned with Fibonacci intervals when measured at the micron scale. Even the grooves, tiny and visually inconsistent, formed a fractal resonance when modeled three-dimensionally. It was as if the sigil was less an artifact and more an equation, encoded not with words, but with recursion, harmony, and collapse. One detail particularly captured Duquesne's attention. At the exact center of the sigil, where the arms converge, lies a tiny depression, less than 2 millimeters across. He conducted simulations to ascertain what type of stress or wear might create such an indentation. The result? None. The mark was not a flaw, it was intentional. Furthermore, it functioned as a focal node. Duquesne hypothesized that if the sigil were placed under light and rotated precisely, its geometry would create a lensing effect, a dispersion of light analogous to that produced by a diffraction grating. In essence, the sigil might be a computational device, a machine not powered by electricity but by alignment, a cosmological computer with the stars as its power source. And that is where the numbers became crucial. Hidden within the rotational geometry, specifically the angular ratio of the 5 intact arms to the broken sixth, was a mathematical constant not commonly found in medieval systems, 729. At first glance, it appeared arbitrary, but Duquesne recognized it instantly. 3 to the 6th power, 3x, 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 3, or 729. Recalling the Charter of the 13, mentioned later in this investigation, which references a ceremony performed once every 729 years, a connection emerges. At the time, this was largely considered allegorical or poetic. However, if that number is embedded in the sigil's very structure, if it is an integral part of the artifact's geometry, then the discussion moves beyond poetic mysticism. It concerns a clock, a countdown spanning centuries, with the year 2039, the date of the celestial alignment situated 729 years after the dissolution of the Templars in 1310. Again, the convergence tightens. The obscure detail most often overlooked is that 729 also appears in Hermetic and Pythagorean mysticism as the number of restoration, a term employed in texts referencing the return of balance after catastrophic disruption. This association was not made public until Duquesne quietly published his findings in a small, peer-reviewed journal in late 2018. The article was titled Recurrence Engines, Geometry, Fractals, and the Temporal Functions of Esoteric Devices. It received almost no attention. Subsequently, the journal was acquired, the article removed, and the archive closed, a familiar pattern. The open question among those who have reviewed Duquesne's data is, was the sigil designed by someone who comprehended these mathematical principles, or did it emerge from a deeper, unknowable pattern? Did the Templars intentionally embed the number 729, or did the number reveal itself to them, like a whisper from the very structure of time? Some believe it points to ancient knowledge, not extraterrestrial, not magical, but simply ancient, forgotten, transmitted not in words, but in ratios, carried from Sumerian stargazers to Egyptian architects to Arabic mathematicians, and finally to a group of warrior monks who ostensibly should have possessed none of this knowledge. The connection here is subtle but essential. Recalling the lysagous curves identified in the sigil's surface texture, which describe harmonic oscillations, essentially wave interference, Duquesne discovered that when modeled as a 3D topography, the sigil's surface replicates a harmonic field collapse at 729 Hz. Coincidence? Or was the sigil designed not only to be observed, but to resonate? One might inquire about the significance of 729 Hz, what that frequency implies. The answer is that it signifies nothing in isolation. Frequency alone is inert. However, when combined with structure, geometry, rotation, and precise timing, it transforms into a signal, a tone, perhaps even a summons. The implications are dizzying. If the sigil is a device, what occurs when it activates? What is the outcome of the countdown? Is it spiritual, astronomical, psychological, or something entirely different? For the sigil does not prophesy an ending. It counts to 1 to the number of the end. And what transpires thereafter, no one has yet dared to record. In a quiet archive room beneath the Torre do Tombo in Lisbon, filed among centuries of forgotten maritime records, exists a document whose existence was long suspected but never verified. It is a single sheet of vellum, brittle with age and inked in a peculiar blend of Latin and Galician Portuguese. Its heading reads simply, Carta dos Treze Silencios, or the Charter of the 13 Silent Ones. It is unsigned, undated, and anonymous, but the seal pressed into the corner, though faded and partially crumbled, still bears a haunting shape, a cross with 6 arms, one, as always, broken. This charter is not a law, an edict, or even a letter. It is a ritual prescription, a set of instructions written in such ceremonial prose that it reads less like an administrative record and more like a code of conduct for spectral entities. It describes the formation of a conclave, 13 individuals, nameless and faceless, selected once every 729 years. Their duty: to tend the wheel, seal the mouth, and ignite the circle when time curls upon itself. The phrasing is maddeningly opaque. It never explicitly mentions the sigil, but it reiterates the same numeric and geometric cues found etched into the artifact itself. And embedded within the final paragraph is the most specific line of all. Upon the return of the 6-pointed cross to the southern stone and the shadow of Saturn upon the Virgin, the watch shall resume. The circle must be spoken not with voice, but with action. For those following closely, the 729-year cycle once again connects 1,310 to 2,039. This constitutes the historical fact. The charter exists. It is archived and cataloged as a private devotional text of unknown sectarian origin. However, behind closed doors, numerous cryptographic specialists have examined its structure and concur that it is not merely devotional rambling, it is a countdown protocol. Here is the obscure detail that has agitated scholars prone to conspiracy theories. The charter is formatted into 13 stanzas. Each stanza consists of 7 lines, totaling 91 lines, which coincidentally happens to be the number of days in a single astronomical quarter of the solar year. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, 4 seasons, 4 quarters, 13 watchers. If this appears arbitrary, consider that the inner edge of the sigil's outer ring, when evenly divided according to its etched indentations, also segments into 13 radial divisions. One of these, the 13th, is narrower than the others, and aligns with the broken arm of the cross, the identical spoke where every harmonic and alignment model indicates the symbolic fracture. Coincidence? At this juncture, the term begins to sound like denial. The true enigma now arises. If 13 individuals were genuinely designated once every 729 years to perpetuate this ritual, where are they? Who selects them? Who possesses this knowledge? The charter offers an enigmatic, oblique answer. They are not chosen by man, but recognized by sign. The watchers shall not know one another until the mirror darkens. Many interpret this to signify that the reappearance of the sigil activates their awareness, or even their memory, a triggering device not solely for prophecy, but for individuals. This is the open question. Are these 13 metaphorical, allegorical, or are they actual human beings, descended through secret lineages or bound by sacred oaths, reactivated only at the appointed moment? They are tasked with a duty so ancient and so surreal that it has lost all grounding in logic. A controversial 1987 manuscript from Portuguese historian Thomas Frade da Costa suggests a possible lineage. He traced records of 13 unusually interconnected family names, all recurring every few generations in archives across the Languedoc-Portugal axis. These were not merely recurring names, but similar dates of death clusters of passings within the same years, spaced centuries apart. According to Frade, these clusters occurred roughly every 729 years. Such a claim typically leads to dismissal from academic conferences. However, Frade died under unusual circumstances, just a year after his findings were privately published. Heart attack, they stated, in the bathtub, with his notes missing. The connection, undoubtedly perceived by now, reverts to Frater Leontius and his lost manuscript. The circle that speaks, the seal that waits. If he was the first of the 13, it would explain his flight, his silence, and his cryptic prose. And if the sigil was intended to mark not merely time, but activation, then the 2001 rediscovery at Bezu was not a fluke. It was the signal. And here is the chilling part. One of the charter's final lines reads, "The iron tongue shall strike not 12 but 13, and in that final hour, the mirror must be turned." The iron tongue, the mirror, 13 hours. None of these references appear in standard Templar liturgy, yet all of them appear separately in the various investigative threads surrounding the sigil, from the mirrored artifact near Rennes-le-Château to the silent chant of the broken angelic war, to the coded 729-year recurrence hidden in its geometry. And all of them point to the same inexorable conclusion. The sigil is not a relic, it is a mechanism. The charter is not myth, it is the manual. And somewhere, whether they are aware of it or not, 13 individuals may be gravitating towards the same location, the same moment, drawn by something they cannot name. Something inscribed in metal, in stars, in time. And when they converge, the wheel turns. The air in the Black Forest becomes dense after dusk. Even in the contemporary era of streetlights and satellites, an ancient essence lingers in the shadows between its pines. Venture far enough from the designated trails, and the world constricts. Dark tree trunks lean inward like conspirators. The wind transforms leaves into murmurs. It is readily comprehensible why legends took root here, but one in particular transcends folklore, reaching across time with significant historical resonance. In October 1894, Dietrich Clausen, a Prussian civil engineer, supervised a survey project for a proposed railway extension through the southern edge of the forest near Freiburg. He maintained a meticulous field journal, standard practice for the period, which included measurements, weather conditions, and occasional complaints about muddy boots or faulty equipment. However, on the night of October 21st, Clausen recorded a divergent entry. He and 2 assistants had opted to camp rather than undertake the arduous return hike to the village. Around 2:40 a.m., Clausen was roused by a low, rhythmic hum. Initially, he presumed it to be distant thunder, but as he exited the tent, he observed faint torchlight through the trees, flickering in a distinct pattern. The journal entry, later recovered and archived in Berlin, describes his observation in simple, unadorned terms. A procession of figures, 13 inches number. They wore long robes, their hoods drawn. They circled a stone marked with a kind of compass star, 6 lines, one fractured. I could not see faces. I could not hear voices. Only the low sound like a choir humming a single note. He remained motionless, refrained from calling out. His assistants, when questioned the following day, claimed to have seen nothing. Yet, the next evening, Clausen discovered a small object beside the stone, partially buried in the soil, a circular pendant made of some dark metal, engraved with a six-pointed star, and at its center, what appeared to be a planetary glyph for Saturn. He retained it, and 3 years later, he drowned in his bathtub. His wife asserted that he had become increasingly paranoid in the months leading up to his death, speaking in his sleep about turning mirrors, the tongue of silence, and a wheel that hums. Here is the historical fact. The Black Forest has long been associated with secret societies, particularly during the early modern period. Documents from the 17th century refer to midnight congregations held on solar equinoxes and during rare planetary alignments. While most of these groups were local or symbolic offshoots of Freemasonry, Rosicrucian experiments, some scholars believe one particular lineage operated in deliberate obscurity, a group known as Die Stillen Wächter, the Silent Watch. The term appears sparingly in Prussian police records from the 1800s, typically dismissed as rumor. However, a classified memorandum dated 1851, now declassified and housed in the Bundesarchiv, describes an intercepted letter referencing the return of the 13 and the reawakening of the fracture beneath the fir trees. The obscure detail is that this letter was intercepted in Freiburg. What connects this ritual to the sigil? It is the shape. The compass star Clausen described precisely matches the pattern etched into the disc discovered at Bezu, the same broken sixth line, the identical radial geometry. And the planetary glyphs, particularly Saturn, constitute a recurring motif among watchers from Cairo to Carcassonne. However, the Black Forest ritual introduces a new element, the sound. Multiple sources mention it not a chant, not a song, but a tone, low, harmonic, continuous. Recalling the earlier analysis of the sigil's harmonic structure, the mathematical modeling identified a 729 Hz resonance when the disc is rotated under specific light conditions. This is not a frequency typically chanted by humans. It is a tone, a tuning, a signal. This leads to a disturbing possibility. What if the Black Forest ritual was not commemorative, but functional? What if those 13 hooded figures were not merely honoring an ancient symbol, but activating it? If the sigil is indeed a device, and if that device responds to sound and alignment, then such rituals might not be symbolic at all. They might be keys. The open scholarly debate hinges on this interpretation. Some researchers argue that the 1894 account is unreliable, dreamlike, and anecdotal. However, the pendant Clausen recovered has been verified. It exists. It was analyzed in 1974 by a metallurgical laboratory in Munich. The alloy defied classification, containing trace amounts of iridium and antimony in ratios uncharacteristic of European metallurgy. Its engraving was microscopic, laser precise, and its central indentation, almost imperceptible, matched the recess found at the core of the sigil itself. Yet, no public institution currently holds the pendant. It vanished from the archive in 1981. All that remains is a black and white photograph tucked in a drawer at the Technical University of Berlin, with a handwritten caption, "Uncatalogued sample, echo artifact." That word again, echo, silence, resonance. It recalls the chant from Freiburg, the wheel turned alone, the mirror that did not reflect, the angelic seal that bound the heavens in stillness. Everything eventually circles back. The figures in the Black Forest might have been initiates or inheritors of the Charter of the 13. If so, their presence in 1894 suggests a chilling implication. The countdown had already commenced. Preparations were underway, not in churches or temples, but secretly within the forest, by those who remembered what others had forgotten. The connection, quiet but deliberate, brings us to the recurring motif of activation. The sigil, the mirror, the chant, the sound, the number, 13, alignment, silence, Saturn. Each element layered like concentric rings, not disparate, but resonant. And here is the most unsettling thought. Clausen described the figures as circling the stone in silence, yet he heard sound. He wrote, "There were no mouths, only the note." This leads one to ponder who or what was producing the sound. For if the sigil responds to harmonic triggers, perhaps it does not require human initiation. Perhaps it merely requires human presence, at the opportune moment, in the correct location, to listen. Their roles are absent from official records. They held no lands, wore no insignia of rank, and participated in none of the order's public campaigns. Their names, if ever recorded, have been lost to history. Yet traces persist in slips of parchment, fleeting references in trial records, and the margins of forgotten letters. They are the individuals the records omit, but whom rumors refuse to release, the Watchers. In 1312, Frater Gio, a minor Templar scribe imprisoned in Avignon, underwent interrogation over several days. Most of his responses consisted of mundane denials, evasions, and attempts at theological justification. However, near the conclusion of the transcript, just before the session abruptly ended, he made a cryptic statement. "The Watchers are gone to the hills. The last light is theirs." No follow-up question was recorded. No clarification sought. The following day, Guio was discovered deceased in his cell. Suicide, it was declared. He had inscribed something on the wall with bloodied fingertips, a crude circle, and beneath it, a single fractured line. Here is a historical fact. During the final years of the Templar Order, particularly after the arrests commenced in France in 1307, a number of knights and clerics vanished. They did not undergo trial. They did not seek refuge in England or Portugal. They simply disappeared. Contemporary reports estimate that nearly 15% of the Order's recorded personnel were unaccounted for by the time of its dissolution. Disappearances in the 14th century were not uncommon due to war, illness, or shipwreck. However, what renders this statistic unusual is the accompanying silence. The Church exerted considerable effort in apprehending fugitives accused of heresy. Yet, in these specific cases, no pursuit appears to have occurred. It is as if a higher authority tacitly accepted their absence. This silence has led a small number of researchers to propose the existence of a shadow sect within the Order, not a splinter group, but a designated role, a silent rank beyond that of master and preceptor. These were guardians not of territory or treasure, but of knowledge. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for this theory originates from a letter dated 1325, discovered in the cloisters of a Cistercian monastery in northern Italy. The author is anonymous, but the recipient is addressed solely as Custos, guardian. The letter references a prior ceremony, the turning of the mirror, and warns that the circle has spoken sooner than the chart foretold. However, the signature presents the true enigma, not a name, not a title, but a symbol, a six-pointed star with one spoke broken. This is the obscure detail. The Watchers may never have referred to themselves by that term. The appellation appears only as whispers, retrospectively applied by later scholars. Yet, the geometry persists: the fractured arm, the circle, the silence. One document, the so-called Canonical of the Hidden Ones, was smuggled out of Avignon in the early 18th century and is presently held in a private collection in Antwerp. It is part poem, part ritual instruction, and describes a role performed not during the zenith of the Order's power, but during its decline. It speaks of a final generation of guardians instructed to preserve not symbols, but timing. The refrain reads, "We do not guard the blade nor the book, we guard the hour. We are the eyes between the minutes. We are the space between the stars." This poem, found repeatedly in various forms across Europe, hints at a group whose function was not to combat or to proselytize, but to wait, to witness, and perhaps, when the alignment returned, to act. The question, of course, is whether they still exist. Some argue that the Watchers were absorbed into other secret societies, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, or more obscure continental orders. However, the symbols do not align. Most modern secret societies pursue ideals, power, or enlightenment. The Watchers, if the documents are to be believed, had no interest in power. Their loyalty was to time itself. A more unsettling theory posits that their role was generational, passed silently through bloodlines or sacred oaths, reactivated only at the appointed moment. One passage from the Codex Leontius, the same manuscript from our lost brother, mentions a cycle of 13 threes, which some interpret as a reference to 39 Watchers distributed across history, activated in phases. We now recall the Charter of 13. If that document indeed prescribes a ritual to be performed once every 729 years, it is conceivable that the Watchers function as timekeepers, ensuring that when the cycle resets, all components are in place, not a congregation, but a circuit. The connection tightens here: the Black Forest ritual, the mirror, the number 729, the harmonic resonance. In each instance, echoes of timing and coordination have been observed. But who coordinates? Who watches the stars? Who returns to the same ritual site century after century? Perhaps those who have always watched, and perhaps they have been closer than one might imagine. A final note. In 2002, shortly after the discovery of the sigil at Bézieux, a sealed envelope was mailed to the French Ministry of Culture. It bore no return address and no fingerprints. Inside was a slip of paper with a single line. "It is not too early. It is precisely now." Beneath the line were 13 dashes, one broken. If that letter is genuine, then the Watchers are not gone. They are active, and the clock they have tended across centuries is now, finally, audibly ticking. And if they are watching, then perhaps humanity is being watched. It is often overlooked that the Templars possessed ships. Most recollect the Order's gleaming swords, fortified strongholds, and repositories of gold. Fewer recall their extensive maritime network, encompassing coastal commanderies, inland river ports, and entire fleets operating not only in the Mediterranean but also in the North Atlantic. Their activities extended beyond waging wars in the Holy Land. They were engaged in the movement of people, knowledge, and potentially relics. One particular voyage stands out, like a ripple in the profound silence that succeeded the Order's collapse. A final journey northward, towards the lands of ice. The historical record concerning this is frustratingly sparse. However, in a 1343 naval logbook recovered from the archives of the Hanseatic League, inexplicably misfiled among grain contracts, lies a single, inexplicable entry. A scribe, noting the arrival of a small ship at Bergen, Norway, records, "3 men, foreign, bearing a sign of red upon white, requesting no lodging, said to be on pilgrimage to Nordlios." Nordjas, the Old Norse term for the Northern Lights. This constitutes the initial clue. From this point, the trail becomes almost literally glacial. A 15th century Icelandic saga, Guðmundar Saga Gatha, includes an unusual passage describing strange monks from the southern seas who built no chapel but studied the sky and carved wheels into the stone. The local populace referred to them as Stjörnuverðir Star Watchers. No names, no dates, merely rumor. However, in 2009, during construction near the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, a region long associated with volcanic energy and mythic pilgrimage, archaeologists unearthed a stone slab buried face down beneath a collapsed lava shelf. It bore no runes, no Viking symbology, but carved into its face was a perfect circle with radial lines, 6 arms, 1 truncated, the distinctive Templar geometry. The slab is now housed in the National Museum of Iceland. Its existence has been publicly acknowledged, though its design has not. Officially, it is catalogued as medieval cosmographic unknown. Unofficially, it has become the focal point of one of the most obscure theories in the sigil mystery, that the Templars, in their final days, established an astronomical observatory in Iceland, not for worship, but for alignment. Let us delve into this. During the 13th and 14th centuries, Iceland was not the frozen backwater often imagined. Monasteries flourished, and the clarity of its night sky was unparalleled. Crucially, the North Pole's axial precession was beginning to shift into its current orientation, rendering this latitude uniquely suited for tracking long-cycle celestial events. Recalling the number 729, the countdown encoded in the sigil, it is clear this is not a human scale of time. It is stellar time, and to measure stellar time accurately, one requires the appropriate vantage point. This is a historical fact. In the early 14th century, a set of astronomical texts arrived in Iceland from undisclosed sources. These manuscripts, written in Latin, employed terminology inconsistent with Islamic astronomy, Greek scholarship, or even early Western observations. One of them includes diagrams depicting Saturn's synodic cycle plotted across 8 centuries. It also features a star chart annotated in a cipher that, when rotated through a Caesar shift of 13 characters, spells out the word sigillum seal. The obscure detail here is a footnote, inscribed in a different hand centuries later. It reads, "This map is not for navigation, it is for preparation." Thus, the question arises, what were they preparing for? This is where the connection becomes unavoidable. The mirror, the chant, the watchers, the number of the end, each thread hints at a timing mechanism, an event tied to a specific celestial rhythm. If this is the case, the Templars would have required a location to monitor that rhythm somewhere isolated, stable, and dark. Iceland perfectly fits this description. Now, consider this. A map known as the Carta Marina, published in 1539 by Olaus Magnus, depicts the North Atlantic in meticulous detail. Yet, near the western coast of Iceland, a tiny, unlabeled island is shown bearing only an image, a wheel. No settlement, no animals, no ships, simply a wheel. This map was suppressed shortly after its printing, and copies are rare. However, that image has perplexed cartographers for centuries. Some identify it as an emblem of a whirlpool, others a printing error. Yet, when overlaid with modern star maps, the wheel's position aligns with the rising point of Virgo during the 2039 alignment, at that latitude, on that specific date. Coincidence? Possibly. However, in this narrative, coincidences tend to accumulate like frost on ancient stone. The open question remains: what became of this northern outpost? If the Templars indeed constructed a star-watching sanctuary in Iceland, why has it left so few traces? A controversial theory, circulated quietly among certain esoteric historians, suggests that the site still exists, that it was abandoned, not destroyed, sealed, and is now waiting. Furthermore, its location is purportedly encoded into the sigil itself, using longitude expressed as celestial arc minutes rather than degrees. Dr. John Torvik, one such researcher, believes these coordinates indicate a cavern beneath the Snæfellsjökull volcano. He claims to have discovered seismic irregularities consistent with a man-made structure. He has applied for excavation permits 6 times. All 6 applications have been denied. Icelandic authorities cite environmental protection concerns. However, in 2017, a classified report leaked to a Swedish journalist revealed that the site had been designated culturally sensitive due to foreign heritage claims. It did not specify which foreign heritage. Torvik's latest appeal, filed in 2023, has, as of this writing, not been denied. The implication lingers. The Templars, it is now suspected, did more than merely safeguard the sigil. They mapped it, tracked it, and aligned with it. Their final voyage was not towards conquest. It was towards calculation. And what they constructed in the frozen north may not have been a refuge, but a trigger. For Iceland does not merely lie at the edge of the world, it lies at the edge of time. They were not merely accused of heresy, they were accused of listening. Among the extensive list of charges levied against the Knights Templar in the early 14th century, idolatry, blasphemy, secret rituals, one stands out, not for its theatricality, but for its quiet absurdity. Several accused knights were said to have studied the movements of the heavens with tools of forbidden proportion. This was not astrology, nor astronomy, but geometry, sacred geometry. At the time, this constituted less a scientific charge and more a spiritual crime. Geometry was deemed sacred only when applied to the construction of cathedrals or the calculation of feast days. However, when employed to map the sky, or, more dangerously, to predict its movements, it trespassed into territory the Church considered hazardous, presumptuous, and subversive. For what if the heavens were not divine chaos? What if they were patterned? This is the historical fact. By the mid-13th century, the Templars had amassed a discreetly growing collection of mathematical manuscripts. These included translated copies of Euclid, Arabic texts from Al-Andalus, and geometric treatises smuggled from Byzantium. Most were housed in commanderies far from Rome's oversight, particularly in Portugal and southern France. However, one scroll, known only as Spira Obscura, has become central to understanding why the Church may have feared the Templars even more than it publicly indicated. The scroll, recovered in 1906 from the ruins of a Templar outpost near Tomar, Portugal, contains diagrams resembling nested circles, spirals, and intersecting arcs. Yet, when processed through modern modeling software, these images resolve into a type of harmonic map, consistent with orbital resonance patterns between Earth, Mars, and Saturn over multi-century intervals. In essence, it is a model of planetary timing. Now, here is the obscure detail that renders this scroll impossible to dismiss. In one corner, scratched in a slightly different ink, is a peculiar Latin phrase, Audivimus spas fractus loqui in silentio. We heard the broken spheres speak in silence. This is nearly identical to language found in the seal of the angelic war chant, and, again, in the Leontius manuscript, the concept of broken celestial music, of disrupted harmony. This brings us to the so-called music of the spheres. In medieval cosmology, particularly within Neoplatonic and early Christian traditions. It was believed that the movements of the planets generated a form of divine music, not audibly perceived, but genuinely present a harmony of orbits, a metaphysical symphony. But the Templars, it appears, believed this music had altered, that a note had ceased. Several trial confessions, brutally extracted and dismissed for centuries, mentioned the disharmony and the wounded star. One even refers to a ritual where initiates were instructed to draw the chord that no longer sounds, followed by a period of enforced silence in the dark. What were they perceiving? Or, more precisely, what were they no longer perceiving? Let us return to the sigil. Its geometry, its broken sixth arm, its radial balance is recognized as more than symbolic. When digitally modeled, the sigil generates an imperfect harmonic field. It resonates discordantly. This is not a metaphor. When laser scanned and processed through frequency analysis software, the sigil's shape generates overtones inconsistent with balanced radial forms. It does not resonate properly. Yet, this flawed resonance precisely matches the pattern described in Spira Obscura, a field warped along a Saturnine arc. Saturn, once again, always Saturn. The connection is inevitable. From the mirror's darkened surface to the silent chant to the Icelandic observatory, everything points to a celestial structure that has been damaged, misaligned. And if one credits the Templars and their mysterious watchers, that misalignment is not metaphorical, it is mechanical. This leads to the open question scholars rarely voice. What if the music of the spheres was not merely a poetic concept? What if it was actual, not a sound, but a force, a synchronization, a system of cosmic ratios that maintain time, matter, and perception in alignment? And what if that system is fracturing? Viewed through this lens, the sigil becomes more than a warning. It transforms into a diagnostic tool, a device constructed not to protect or summon, but to measure, and perhaps, at the appropriate time, to respond. There is one additional layer. In a lesser-known appendix to the Templar interrogation records compiled in 1311, a scribe notes a phrase uttered by a dying knight. He had been burned at the stake in Toulouse, and as the flames consumed his robe, he screamed, "The sixth arm fell. The wheel cracked. The song is dead." 3 sentences, disconnected, or a confession far deeper than theology. Thus the question arises. If the sigil marks a future moment when celestial harmony will fracture, when the silent music of the universe stutters, what then transpires? What happens when the spheres no longer sing? Some believe this moment is not catastrophic but evolutionary, a cosmic shift in perception, a new age, as mystics might term it. Others fear a collapse that the very fabric of time, held together by resonant forces beyond human comprehension, might ripple or rupture. And then there are those who insist the sigil does not merely observe, it compensates. That when the harmonic breach occurs, the sigil performs an action corrects, initiates, or concludes. For heresy, as defined by the Church, was never solely about belief. It was about control. And the greatest heresy of all may have been this: the concept that the heavens were not a mystery to be feared, but a machine to be comprehended. When the sun momentarily disappears, time appears to suspend. Across every culture, every epoch, eclipses have inspired a sacred form of terror. From ancient Babylon to Qing dynasty China, the sudden vanishing of daylight consistently signified more than a mere trick of celestial mechanics. It was an omen, an interruption, a disruption in the regular order of existence. Therefore, when the sigil's radial geometry was initially cross-referenced with eclipse maps from the past millennium, few anticipated anything remarkable. The disk was presumed to be planetary, concerned with alignments, not occlusions. However, then came the revelation. 2 eclipses separated by centuries, positioned at perfectly opposing arcs on the sigil's outer ring. One in 1347, one in 2039, and between them, exactly 729 years. That number, once more. Let us commence with the historical fact. On May 3rd, 1347, a total solar eclipse cast its shadow over a broad swath of southern Europe, including Languedoc. Records from that era, inscribed in a blend of Latin and Occitan, describe the light becoming still, birds falling silent, and a second dusk descending. One chronicler, writing from Carcassonne, claimed the sky trembled as if remembering something. Later that same year, the Black Death commenced its catastrophic spread across Europe. Now, fast forward. On July 23, 2039, a total solar eclipse will again traverse Europe, this time cutting diagonally across the continent, casting a shadow over parts of Spain, southern France, and northern Italy. The path of totality will graze within 40 kilometers of Bezout. Two eclipses, occurring in the same region, exhibiting the same rotational alignment on the sigil's geometry, and separated by the same temporal interval of 729 years. This is not merely poetic symmetry, it is astronomical. The obscure detail here is the Saros cycle, a period of approximately 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, after which eclipses recur in a similar pattern. The two eclipses in 1347 and 2039 do not fall within the same Saros cycle. They are separated by over 40 Saros generations. This renders their alignment not predictable, but unique. Yet, the sigil encodes both. Dr. Jian Mai, an astrophysicist at the University of Leiden, conducted a modeling experiment in 2016. Utilizing precise eclipse path data from NASA and advanced simulation tools, she overlaid the Bezout sigil onto a polar projection of Earth's eclipse map. The results were startling. The broken arm of the sigil, the same fracture traced across chants, ciphers, and celestial schematics aligned within half a degree of both eclipse path's center lines. Mai did not publish her findings in a mainstream journal, citing academic pressures. However, in a private interview, she stated, "It is either deliberate or impossible." This leads to a chilling possibility. What if the sigil was not only tracking planetary motion, but also eclipse recurrence? What if it was designed to mark not where the light shines, but when it vanishes? This connects to a fragment found in the Codex Leontius, where he writes, "The hour of shadow will be twice, the first to silence the world, the second to speak the seal." Many dismiss this as allegory, but recontextualized through the twin eclipse theory, it begins to sound disturbingly literal. The first eclipse, in 1347, preceded an apocalyptic event, not a prophecy, but a plague, a restructuring of civilization. The second eclipse, in 2039, has yet to occur, and the question lingers, will it herald another profound turning point? The connection here is unavoidable. The number of the end, 729 years. The seal of the angelic war, silence descending. The mirror, the chant, the star watchers in Iceland, all observing not merely for light but for the fracture in its rhythm. And here is where it becomes even stranger. A medieval astronomical codex, housed in the Bodleian Library and rarely viewed outside of private requests, includes an anonymous marginalia note written beside a solar diagram. It reads, "Let the dark kiss come twice before the circle breaks, then shall the last key hum again." That sound motif, that low vibration, that idea that the sigil awaits a precise moment when the light disappears, when the hum returns, when something opens. Now, for the open scholarly debate. Are these eclipse alignments intentional, or are they the result of pareidolia perceiving patterns where none exist? Duquesne's work on resonance suggests otherwise. His modeling demonstrates that the sigil's geometry, when viewed as a harmonic device, reacts most intensely to simulated solar occlusion at the same angular tilt as the eclipse paths. This is not merely visual metaphor, it is interference. The sigil's intrinsic resonance, that subtle, inaudible frequency, destabilizes when subjected to eclipse-modeled light fluctuation. In simpler terms, it responds when the sun vanishes. This has given rise to considerable speculation that the sigil might have been designed to perform an action at the moment of an eclipse to activate, emit, or initiate. But what would it initiate? Theories range from spiritual awakening to catastrophic collapse to the revelation of hidden perception. One group, operating under the name Chronostellum, believes the twin eclipses represent a gateway, a cosmic hourglass flipped once in 1347 and poised to be turned again in 2039. They have created simulations predicting gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic field disturbances, and even shifts in human brainwave activity coinciding with eclipse conditions. All speculative, all denied by mainstream science, but none disproven. Therefore, the thought that has subtly underpinned every aspect of this investigation must now be confronted. What if the Templars foresaw this? What if they possessed this knowledge? Not in vague prophetic language, but in precise measurements, in astronomy, in long-forgotten models inherited from older, more obscure traditions, perhaps from Egyptian star priests or Babylonian mathematicians. or even earlier civilizations? And what if the sigil is not a mere memory of those predictions, but the instrument of their fulfillment? 2 eclipses, 2 silences, 1 last seal, and the light between them diminishing. It was composed of iron, not gold-heavy, dull, and unornamented, save for the same symbol observed carved in stone, etched in metal, whispered in chants, and encoded in cipher, a cross with 6 arms, the lowest one fractured. In 1623, an English nobleman struck it with a hammer. This account originates from the private journals of Sir Lionel Ashcombe, a lesser-known antiquarian and member of Parliament, whose interests leaned more towards esoteric curiosities than statecraft. Among his extensive collections, animal skulls, alchemical folios, fragments of Roman coins, one item remained secured in a cedar box for over a decade. A ring, too large for comfortable wear, discovered in the ruins of a chapel on the Ashcombe estate in Northumberland. This was his grandfather's land, and according to family lore, the ring was unearthed in 1598, buried beneath the collapsed altar stone alongside a piece of broken black glass and a scroll so faded it disintegrated upon exposure. But the ring persisted. Lionel's notes describe it with an intensity bordering on obsession, not a thing of beauty, but of purpose. A wheel malformed. The 6th break unsettles me. He sketched it dozens of times, consistently fixating on the broken arm, its deliberate appearance, as though it had been struck or perhaps designed in that manner. This is a historical fact. In the early 17th century, England experienced a brief but intense resurgence of interest in forbidden knowledge. Alchemy, geomancy, angelic languages, anything deemed inappropriate by ecclesiastical law, acquired a magnetic allure. The Ashcombe ring would have fit seamlessly into this context. However, Sir Lionel did not display it, publish about it, or share it with fellow collectors. Instead, he kept it locked away until, as his diary records, the wheel turned and the stars fell ill. What did he signify by this? On August 12, 1623, a triple planetary conjunction occurred. Mercury, Venus, and Mars converged in the pre-dawn sky. Most observers perceived it as a mere celestial curiosity. Lionel, however, interpreted it as a signal. That night, he brought the ring into his study, placed it atop a mirror, and according to his own hand, waited for the silence. What transpired is recorded in a letter to his sister, which was never dispatched, but later discovered among his papers. It reads, "The ring sang without voice. The silence was deeper than death. I saw the 6th fall again. I feared it would open. He shattered the ring with a hammer, a process that required 4 blows. Here is the obscure detail. Fragments of the ring survive. They are held in the Ashcombe family's private collection, and in 1998, they were examined by a team of metallurgists at Oxford under limited access. Their report, quietly published in a footnote in the Journal of Historical Materials, mentioned something curious. The inner surface of the band bore an engraving too fine to be seen with the naked eye. When magnified, it revealed a spiral composed of 13 dots, one misaligned. The number 13 again. This directly connects to the Charter of the 13, the Watchers, the harmonic resonance of the sigil, and the 729-year countdown. The connections are no longer subtle, they are recursive. However, the Ashcombe ring introduces a new element. Fear not symbolic, not theoretical, but physical and tangible. Lionel, by all accounts a rational man, believed the object to be dangerous, not in the manner of a sword or a poison, but in the way a key becomes perilous when it no longer fits a lock, but instead activates something else entirely. The open question becomes, was the ring part of the sigil system a control, a trigger, a duplicate? Was it one of many, a personal relic passed down from one watcher to the next? A secondary account, recorded in the journals of Lionel's manservant, Johan Beck, adds a chilling detail. Beck writes that after the ring was broken, Lionel ceased sleeping. He sat by the fire for hours, muttering about the 6th line, the silent circle, and the hum inside the shadow. He became pale and agitated, insisting that the stars had shifted and that the mirror was facing the wrong way. 3 weeks later, Lionel Ashcombe was dead, officially attributed to heart failure. But Beck's last entry records, he died with his mouth open, as though still listening. The idea that a physical object could channel something, that the sigil's symbols are not merely representations but invitations, is not new. It has been observed with the mirror, the chant, the Icelandic stone. But the ring is distinct. It was wearable, personal. It may have marked an individual, like the Watchers, or operated as a form of harmonic token, one piece of a distributed mechanism scattered across centuries, designed not for constant use, but to wait, and perhaps to warn. For if Lionel's journal is to be believed, he did not destroy the ring out of mere superstition. He destroyed it to halt something, to silence a signal, to prevent the wheel from turning again. Yet, the thought that casts a shadow over this entire chapter persists. What if he was too late? Or more ominously, what if breaking the ring was not a prevention, but a trigger? What if the silence he feared was not silence at all, but merely a temporary pause, waiting for the hum to recommence? Their existence is not widely known. This is by design. They wear no robes, construct no temples, publish no books, organize no rallies, and upload no cryptic online sermons. Indeed, they rarely speak at all. However, upon rigorous observation, a discernible pattern emerges. They identify themselves by various appellations: the Silent Line, the Order of the Sixth Light. In certain circles, they are simply referred to as Continuance, a name drawn from the final page of the Leontius manuscript, suggesting that the seal might continue even when forgotten. They operate in scattered enclaves across Europe and South America, though recent years have witnessed a quiet expansion into North America and parts of Southeast Asia. They do not proselytize or solicit funds. Instead, their activities are focused on observation and data collection. To provide historical context, in 2012, during renovations to a 19th century Jesuit seminary near Cordoba, Argentina, workers uncovered a locked chest sealed with lead. Inside were 13 small notebooks, identical in size and format, though inscribed in different hands. Their contents included diagrams, celestial maps, dates, and recurring references to eclipses, Saturnian cycles, and planetary syzygies. And this phrase, repeated across almost every volume: "The seal is not a relic, it is a rhythm." Those notebooks are now part of a private archival collection. The Argentine government officially listed them as esoteric instructional materials of uncertain origin. However, a digital leak in 2016 revealed scans of several pages. Page 9 of Notebook 5 depicted a familiar shape, 6 arms radiating from a circle, the bottom right one fractured again. But what is more intriguing is what transpired after the leak. Within weeks, 3 individuals contacted the archivist anonymously, all separately, all fluent in obscure medieval Latin, and all claiming prior access to the notebook's contents, despite their never having been publicly viewed before. Each signed their email with the same symbol, a broken ring encircling 13 dots. This is the obscure detail. These contacts did not request access, they requested return. They claimed the notebooks were stolen during the transition and had been meant for the safe watchers. The phrase itself is meaningless unless one recalls Section 17 and the Canticle of the Hidden Ones. We are the eyes between the minutes. If their claims are to be believed, these individuals do not merely subscribe to the sigil's significance, they are actively continuing its work. The situation becomes stranger still. In 2020, Maya Ver, a security researcher, uncovered an encrypted subdomain attached to an otherwise unremarkable historical preservation website in Bruges. Behind layers of obfuscation, she discovered a trove of data: astronomical ephemerides, acoustic modeling charts, and eclipse maps extending into the 24th century. There were scanned images of locations previously discussed: the Snæfellsjökull site in Iceland, the Freiburg forest, the Bezu altar, even the shattered Ashcombe ring, captioned in Latin. One falls to speak the next. And then came the calendar, a countdown updated daily, ticking towards August 4th, 2039. She posted a single image on a private forum. It was removed within hours. Her system was hacked, her files corrupted, and she received a cease and desist notice from a legal firm that does not exist. She has since vanished from digital life. Here the open question arises, now less academic and more existential. Are these modern groups the direct descendants of the Templar Watchers? Have they inherited their charge through bloodline, ritual, or simply shared conviction? Or have they independently discovered the sigil, drawn to it not by tradition, but by resonance? That word again, resonance. The sigil does not broadcast, it draws. It hums softly on a channel few can perceive. Those who do describe dreams, shifts in perception, visions of wheels, rings, and mirrors. Many sense it before they visually confirm it, leading to the possibility that these revivalists are not inheritors but receivers, and the signal is intensifying. One documented case is particularly compelling. In 2017, Lucan des Roches, a French cryptographer, disappeared while mapping a forest near Montségur. When his belongings were recovered, his GPS unit indicated an unnatural walking pattern, perfect concentric circles around a central point marked only as X. Beneath that X, searchers found nothing, but faintly etched into the bark of a nearby tree was the six-armed sigil. Des Roches was later found unharmed 30 kilometers away. He had no memory of walking, but when shown a photograph of the sigil, he wept. A connection here is unavoidable. The Black Forest ritual, the mirrored chant, the Watchers in Iceland, the count of 13 all functioning as discrete circuits in a system of belief or perception centuries in the making. But now that system is stirring, not within temples, not within books, but within people, within minds, in motion. There is a final, quiet theory whispered by those who have dedicated their lives to studying the sigil, that the revivalists are not organizing due to the sigil's rediscovery. They are organizing because the sigil is almost ready, as if it is more than metal, more than symbol.